The dream of certainty and its collapse. For thousands of years, humanity dreamed of certainty. We believed truth was something solid, a foundation that would never shift beneath us. We built temples, laws, and moral codes upon that belief, convinced the universe was arranged in a way our minds could one day fully grasp. Philosophers promised us reason. Priests promised us faith. Science, in its turn, promised us laws that could explain it all. We called this dream knowledge, enlightenment, progress. But it was also comfort, a shelter from the chaos that waited just beyond the edges of understanding. And then came a whisper, a voice from the 19th century that would unsettle everything we thought we knew. Friedrich Nietzsche looked at the world's confident search for certainty and asked the question no one wanted to hear. What if the ground beneath our feet was never stable to begin with? Nietzsche saw the human desire for absolute truth as a dream, beautiful, noble, but ultimately delusional. We longed for something eternal, something beyond change. Yet in our desperation to anchor meaning, we invented gods, ideals, and systems of morality that told us who we were and why we existed. They gave life structure, but they also made us dependent on illusions. He called these illusions metaphysical comforts. They are the stories we tell to avoid facing the raw truth of existence, that beneath the patterns we impose, there might be only flux, movement, becoming, no final order, no perfect truth, just the endless dance of chaos and creation. Nietzsche didn't merely criticize religion or philosophy. He challenged the very notion that truth was something fixed. He suspected that what we called truth was in fact a kind of fiction, a useful one perhaps, but still born from human needs, not divine revelation. There are no facts, he wrote, only interpretations. To Nietzsche, certainty was not a mark of wisdom. It was a symptom of fear. We fear the unknown so deeply that we build systems to hide it from ourselves. We cling to them as children cling to dreams, refusing to wake even as the dream begins to tear at the seams. And like a child awakening from a pleasant illusion, humanity too would have to face the moment when comfort gives way to clarity, and clarity reveals the void. But Nietzsche didn't despair in this realization. He saw something liberating in it. If our truths are fictions, then we are their authors. If the universe has no meaning written into it, then meaning is ours to create. The collapse of certainty, then, is not the end of knowledge. It is the beginning of creativity. Still, the price of this awakening is high. To look into the abyss, Nietzsche warned, is to risk being consumed by it. The mind longs to rest on something solid, and when that ground disappears, we must learn to balance on air, to live without guarantees. Imagine standing at the edge of a great cliff, the world below you obscured by clouds. Every teacher you've trusted, every principle you've followed, told you the ground continues beyond that edge. But now, with the fog clearing, you see there is nothing there, just space. The question is no longer what is true, but how will I live now that truth itself is uncertain? This moment of confrontation is the essence of Nietzsche's philosophy. He asks us to walk forward, not because we know what lies ahead, but because we are brave enough to walk without knowing. The collapse of certainty becomes an invitation to grow stronger, to develop what he called amor fati, the love of one's fate, even when it offers no explanation. Nietzsche saw in this collapse both danger and possibility. Some, he believed, would turn away in fear, clinging to old beliefs, old gods, old systems of thought that promised stability. Others would fall into nihilism, unable to bear the weight of freedom. But a few, the few he called free spirits, would step into the unknown willingly, learning to create their own values in a world where old ones no longer hold. To those few, Nietzsche offered no comforting path. He offered instead a challenge to live as artists of existence, to mold chaos into form without pretending that form is eternal, to dance on the edge of uncertainty with the grace of someone who knows there is no final ground beneath their feet. This is what makes Nietzsche's first blow against certainty so powerful. He doesn't simply remove old beliefs. He replaces them with a call to create. He teaches that truth is not discovered, but forged. That meaning is not found, but made. That the collapse of the dream of certainty is not the end of philosophy, but its rebirth. There is, however, a quiet tragedy in Nietzsche's vision. He understood that most people cannot bear the freedom he describes. Certainty is addictive. It soothes the anxiety of being alive. To question it is to remove the anesthesia and feel fully the trembling of existence. He compared this awakening to the moment when the sailor loses sight of land, when the comforting line between known and unknown disappears and the sea stretches endlessly in every direction. But he also knew that within that sea lies possibility, the chance to sail where no map exists. Certainty may bring safety, but only uncertainty brings growth. The collapse of the old order is terrifying, but it's also what makes creation possible. One must still have chaos in oneself. Nietzsche wrote, to give birth to a dancing star. So the dream of certainty ends, but in its ashes something greater begins. The world becomes open again. Every belief becomes a brushstroke, every life a canvas. The fall of certainty is the rise of imagination. And as the dream dissolves, we awaken to a world more fragile, more frightening, and infinitely more alive. Take a moment to imagine that, a universe with no ultimate answers, yet overflowing with potential. It is here, Nietzsche says, that philosophy truly begins. Not in the comfort of answers, but in the courage to keep asking. And that courage leads us to our next idea, the moment when humanity, having lost its foundation, realizes that something immense has fallen silent. The silence left behind by God himself. God is dead, and now what fills the silence? When Nietzsche declared, God is dead, he wasn't making a boast, he was holding up a mirror. His words were not the celebration of a murderer, but the confession of a civilization that had quietly extinguished its own light. The phrase was not about the literal death of a deity, but the collapse of belief, the fading of the one idea that had given Europe its sense of order, morality, and purpose for centuries. For generations, humanity built its life around the idea of God, not merely as a spiritual figure, but as the anchor of truth itself. Every law, every moral rule, every sense of right and wrong drew strength from that foundation. But the Enlightenment, with its rationalism, its science, its confidence in human reason, slowly began to erode the soil beneath it. By the time Nietzsche wrote those words, faith still existed in name, but its roots had withered. Nietzsche saw this before most did. He saw that we were still living as if God existed, still speaking of morality, justice, and truth as though they were eternal, while in reality, the belief that supported them had quietly vanished. He described modern man as standing in the aftermath of a cosmic event he didn't yet understand. We had killed God, he said, not with swords or flames, but with reason, with doubt, with the quiet insistence that everything must be proven. The tragedy wasn't the act itself, it was our blindness to its consequence. This tremendous event is still on its way. Nietzsche wrote, it has not yet reached the ears of men. He knew that removing God from the center of life would not make the world brighter, but darker. We had unchained the earth from its sun. For Nietzsche, this was the true meaning of God is dead. It wasn't victory, it was vertigo. Without God, there was no longer a cosmic reason for anything. No divine plan, no moral order, no purpose waiting to be found. The universe, once seen as the work of a benevolent creator, became an endless expanse of indifferent forces. And yet, in this terrifying freedom, Nietzsche saw potential. He believed that only now, in the absence of divine authority, could humanity finally grow up. Like a child who loses their parent, humanity would mourn, but mourning could give way to creation. Still, he feared that most people would not rise to this challenge. The death of God, he predicted, would not lead to liberation, but to despair. We would build idols to replace him, ideologies, nations, wealth, pleasure, even science itself, all pretending to offer meaning, where none remained. God is dead, Nietzsche warned, and we have killed him, but his shadow still looms. The shadow of God lives on in our words, in our morality, our politics, even our psychology. We speak of justice, progress, equality, and human rights, as if they were eternal truths. But without the divine foundation that once upheld them, Nietzsche asked, what gives them authority now? If there is no higher lawgiver, can morality survive, or does it become merely a matter of preference, shaped by power, culture, and convenience? Nietzsche saw what few dared to admit, that when belief dies, values begin to decay with it. He didn't call for chaos, he called for honesty. He wanted us to face the silence we had created, the silence that follows the death of everything we once believed to be absolute. That silence is not peaceful. It's haunting, because within it lies a question we cannot escape. If there is no God, then what is left? What defines good and evil? What gives life meaning? What makes suffering bearable? Nietzsche's answer was not simple. He didn't seek to resurrect God through new dogma. Instead, he turned the challenge inward. If the old source of meaning has died, then meaning itself must be created, not received. Life, he said, must be justified by the living. But that creation demands courage. It requires that we become, in his words, artists of existence. We must shape our own values as sculptors shape stone, knowing the work is never complete. It is an act of defiance against the void, and at the same time, an act of love for life itself. Nietzsche feared that most people would not take this path. Instead, they would become what he later called the last men, comfortable, compliant, content with mediocrity. They would fill the silence with distractions. They would trade the weight of freedom for the safety of trivial pleasures. The death of God would not spark new creation. It would lull civilization into sleep. But for the few who can bear the silence, who do not flee from the emptiness, there is hope, because in that silence, creation becomes possible. When the old light goes out, new stars can be born. Nietzsche's call was not to despair, but to awaken, to recognize that with the collapse of divine meaning comes the chance to give life a meaning that is ours. In this sense, the death of God is both tragedy and opportunity. It marks the end of innocence, the end of humanity's childhood under the watchful eye of heaven, but it also begins our adulthood. We are no longer bound by commandments written above us. We become the authors of our own code. Yet the danger remains. Freedom can either elevate or destroy us. Nietzsche's warning echoes like a prophecy through modern history, through wars fought over ideologies, through nations worshiping new gods of progress, through individuals seeking meaning in fame or comfort. We are still living in the shadow of that death, still trying to fill the silence it left behind. If you listen closely, you can still hear that silence, not empty, but waiting. It asks what kind of beings we will become now that the universe no longer tells us what we are. Take a moment to feel that question, not to answer it, just to feel its weight. The silence left by God is the silence in which every new meaning begins. And from that silence, another thought emerges. If truth and meaning are no longer given from above, then where do they come from at all? Perhaps they are not discovered, but invented. The death of meaning, when values lose their weight. When Nietzsche spoke of the death of God, he was not only mourning the loss of faith, he was announcing the unraveling of meaning itself. The two had always been intertwined. For centuries, the idea of God had served as the sun around which every human value revolved. Without it, the sky of meaning begins to darken. The compass spins. Words like good and evil, truth and beauty begin to drift, losing the gravity that once kept them in place. The modern world inherited these values but forgot their source. We still speak of justice, progress, equality, but the foundation beneath them has eroded. Nietzsche compared this moment to the slow fading of a distant star. Long after its light reaches us, the star itself may already be dead. The death of meaning does not happen all at once. It begins quietly, almost invisibly. It begins when belief becomes habit, when the symbols of morality are repeated out of routine, not conviction, when rituals persist, but the spirit that once animated them is gone. Nietzsche looked around 19th century Europe and saw a culture still speaking the language of morality, but without belief in its divine origin. The cathedral was still standing, but the soul inside had long since departed. This is what he called nihilism, not a love of destruction, but the recognition that the old values no longer have weight. It is the moment when the structures we built to give life purpose begin to collapse from within. To Nietzsche, nihilism wasn't just a philosophical issue. It was a psychological crisis, one that would haunt the modern world. He saw it in the growing emptiness of culture, in the way art, science, and politics had become disconnected from the deeper question of why. Humanity, he said, was suffering not from ignorance, but from exhaustion, a weariness of spirit that comes when life no longer feels anchored in anything higher. Nietzsche described this crisis with chilling precision. When values lose their origin, they become hollow. What was once sacred becomes fashionable. What was once true becomes relative. The words remain the same, but their meanings shift like sand. A society without shared belief, he warned, drifts toward chaos, or worse, toward apathy. For when nothing has meaning, nothing can truly be loved, fought for, or sacrificed for. And yet Nietzsche refused to see nihilism as an ending. He saw in it the painful but necessary stage of transformation, the dark night before a new dawn. Just as a forest fire clears the way for new growth, the collapse of old values makes space for creation. But he knew that few would face that fire willingly. Most people, when confronted with the loss of meaning, would try to rebuild the ruins rather than start anew. Nietzsche's philosophy was not a call to despair, but to courage. He wanted humanity to move through nihilism, not around it. To accept that meaning is not something found, it is something made. When we can no longer rely on divine order, the task of giving value to existence falls to us. To give birth to a dancing star, he wrote, one must still have chaos in oneself. But that chaos is not easy to bear. It's easier to follow inherited values than to create one's own. It's easier to call something good because tradition says so than to ask what makes it good for you. Nietzsche compared this to the weightlessness of space. Once the gravitational pull of faith disappears, the mind drifts, searching for something new to orbit. This loss of gravity is not only philosophical, it's emotional. People begin to feel a quiet hollowness in their daily lives. Success feels empty. Pleasure fades quickly. Ideologies promise purpose but deliver obedience. We begin to chase experiences instead of meaning, movement instead of direction. Nietzsche saw this as the sickness of the modern soul, a restless search for purpose in a world that has forgotten how to create it. He didn't blame science or progress for this decay. He blamed our unwillingness to grow beyond the comforts they replaced. Humanity had removed the gods, but refused to take their place. We dethroned heaven but failed to ascend ourselves. Nietzsche's solution was radical. If meaning no longer descends from above, it must rise from within. He urged us to become what he called value creators, to build new ideals that affirm life instead of denying it. He despised philosophies that made life feel like a burden to escape, calling them symptoms of weakness. True strength, he believed, is the ability to say yes to life, even when it has no justification. To live without given meaning is not to live without meaning at all. It is to recognize that meaning is an art form, one we must practice consciously. Life becomes a canvas again, and each choice, each belief, each act of courage is a brushstroke. But Nietzsche knew that most people would resist this freedom. Freedom can feel like falling. The collapse of certainty leaves a silence that many cannot endure. Some will retreat to old faiths. Others will surrender to nihilism, declaring that nothing matters at all. And some will fill the void with distractions, wealth, ideology, pleasure, anything that numbs the pain of meaninglessness. He called these coping mechanisms the opiates of modernity. They soothe, but they do not heal. They keep us asleep in comfort rather than awake in creation. The death of meaning, Nietzsche warned, is not the end of philosophy, but the test of it. Only by facing the void can we begin to give life new weight. So what does it mean to live in the aftermath of this death? It means to awaken every day knowing there is no higher script, no divine guarantee, yet to live as though your choices still matter. It means to create value not because it's eternal, but because it's yours. It means to love the world even when it gives no reason to be loved. Nietzsche believed that this act of saying yes to life despite its indifference is the ultimate rebellion. It transforms nihilism from despair into power. When you stop asking for the universe to justify itself, you begin to justify it through your existence. Meaning is no longer something to be found, it becomes something you live. Take a moment to let that sink in. To live after the death of meaning is not to be lost. It is to be free. To walk through the ruins of old beliefs and realize you are still standing, that your life, fragile and fleeting as it is, can still shine with its own light. And from that realization, a new question arises, one that would haunt Nietzsche's mind and shape his later works. If truth itself is unstable, how do we know anything at all? The crisis of truth, why we invent what we believe. For most of history, truth was seen as something out there, stable, objective, waiting to be discovered like a hidden treasure buried in the earth. Philosophers, scientists, and theologians all searched for it in their own ways. Truth was the shining ideal that promised order in chaos, meaning in confusion. But Nietzsche looked at this pursuit and asked a dangerous question. What if truth itself is just another illusion, one we created because we couldn't bear to live without it? This was not a call to abandon truth, but to examine why we cling to it. Nietzsche suspected that our devotion to truth wasn't driven by pure curiosity. It was driven by fear. Fear of uncertainty, fear of chaos, fear that without something fixed, the world would lose all meaning. He argued that what we call truth is often nothing more than a shared illusion, a set of beliefs that survive because they are useful, not because they are absolute. In his essay on Truth and Lies, in a non-moral sense, Nietzsche described humans as clever animals who invented truth to live together. We call certain things true because they help us survive, cooperate, and communicate, not because they represent some cosmic reality. Think of language itself. Every word we speak is a metaphor. The word tree doesn't contain the essence of the tree. It's just a sound we agreed upon. Over time, these metaphors harden. They lose their flexibility. They begin to feel like facts. Nietzsche called this the solidification of metaphors, the process by which imagination freezes into dogma. This idea unsettles us because it suggests that truth is not discovered, it's manufactured. That our understanding of reality is filtered through countless layers of interpretation, bias, and need. Even science, Nietzsche said, does not reveal truth but imposes a framework of order upon the chaos of existence. The laws of nature are our way of organizing experience, useful, consistent, but still human. He saw this as both humbling and liberating. If truth is a construction, then we are its architects. We are not passive observers of reality. We are creators shaping it through our perspectives. But creation comes with responsibility. If we invent what we believe, then we must also bear the consequences of those inventions. Nietzsche's insight here is radical. Truths are tools, not commandments. They help us navigate life, but they are not sacred. When they stop serving life, when they suppress creativity or deny complexity, they should be questioned, even destroyed. He warned that clinging to absolute truths is how civilizations decay. The same ideals that once gave meaning eventually become cages, imprisoning the very minds they once enlightened. He illustrated this through the idea of perspectivism. No single viewpoint can capture the whole of reality. Each person sees only a fragment. To know truth, we must embrace a plurality of perspectives. To look at the world not through one window but through many. Truth becomes richer, more alive, when we recognize it as the interplay of countless interpretations rather than the tyranny of one. Yet perspectivism is unsettling because it removes the comfort of certainty. When you realize every belief, including your own, is partial, you begin to feel the ground shift. Nietzsche called this the crisis of truth, not because truth disappears, but because its old authority dissolves. It is the moment when we see that the truths we once worshipped were never divine, only human, fragile, and temporary. And still, we need them. We cannot live without some version of truth, even if we know it's an invention. It gives coherence to our experience. It allows us to tell stories about who we are and why we exist. Nietzsche understood that humanity cannot survive on pure chaos. We need illusion, but we must know it is illusion, to see through the mask without tearing it away completely. The danger comes when we forget that our truths are fictions. When we begin to worship them as eternal, then what was once a living idea turns into dogma, and dogma, Nietzsche said, is the enemy of life. It kills curiosity, suppresses difference, and replaces wonder with obedience. When people claim to have found the truth, he warned, they are often declaring the end of their own thinking. This is why Nietzsche admired artists more than preachers or philosophers. The artist knows they are creating illusions, but they do so joyfully, consciously. They shape beauty from chaos without pretending it's eternal. In this way, art becomes more honest than religion or even science. It admits its subjectivity and thrives within it. But Nietzsche also recognized how lonely this awareness can be. To live without absolute truth is to live without a clear map. It is to walk through fog, knowing there is no final destination, only the journey itself. Most people cannot bear that kind of freedom. They seek comfort in systems that promise certainty, moral, political, or religious. Yet each of these systems, he believed, conceals the same fear, the fear of facing the raw openness of existence. To live truthfully, Nietzsche said, is to face that fear without retreat. It is to stand in the fog and keep walking. To invent your meaning without pretending it was ever given to you. This is not arrogance. It is courage. It is the recognition that, as he wrote, we are artists of our own lives. Take a moment to reflect on that. Every conviction you hold, every belief you carry, is part of the story you've chosen to tell about the world. It may not be eternal, but it's yours. And when enough people share the same story, it becomes a civilization. Nietzsche's warning was not to abandon truth, but to remain awake to its human origin. Truth, he said, is not a destination, but a process, a living dialogue between the world and our imagination. And perhaps that is what makes life beautiful. Not that it is absolute, but that it is constantly being rewritten. As the old dream of fixed truth fades, a new vision begins to emerge, not of despair, but of transformation. Humanity, unmoored from its certainties, begins to invent itself anew. And from that transformation comes a strange figure, a creature of comfort and conformity, the one Nietzsche called the last man. The last man, comfort as the new cage. When Nietzsche wrote, "Thus spoke Zarathustra," he introduced a haunting vision of the future, not of apocalypse, but of complacency, a future not destroyed by chaos, but suffocated by comfort. In this vision, humanity has survived every danger, solved every problem, and tamed every wild force except itself. This new creature he called the last man. The last man is not evil. He is not violent or cruel. He is simply comfortable, perfectly, eternally, hopelessly comfortable. He avoids all risk, all passion, all greatness, because those things disturb the gentle balance of his easy life. He lives longer, eats better, sleeps more soundly, and dreams less. For Nietzsche, the last man was not a fantasy. It was a warning. He saw the seeds of this figure already sprouting in his own time, in the growing worship of safety, equality, and pleasure above all else. He feared that once humanity stopped believing in higher goals, gods, ideals, greatness, it would sink into mediocrity. Without struggle, there would be no growth. Without ambition, no transcendence. The last man's world is one without tragedy, and therefore without depth. He has eliminated pain, but also purpose. In Nietzsche's words, he blinks. That small image captures everything. A creature too tired to feel awe, too timid to desire anything beyond the next comfort. The blink is not of exhaustion, but of indifference. It is the gesture of a soul that has seen everything and found it all equally meaningless. Nietzsche saw in this figure the greatest danger to humanity's spirit, not destruction, but sedation. He wrote that after the death of God, the world would face a choice: either create new values and rise higher, or sink into the soft darkness of nihilism disguised as happiness. The last man represents the second path, the victory of comfort over courage. This vision is chilling because it feels familiar. We live in a world that promises constant convenience, endless distraction, and instant satisfaction. Everything difficult is rebranded as unnecessary. Everything painful is avoided. And in that avoidance, Nietzsche would say, we lose the muscle of the soul. We become passive recipients of existence instead of its creators. The last man does not want to think deeply. Deep thought disturbs sleep. He does not want to feel intensely. Intense feeling hurts. He does not want to climb mountains, literal or metaphorical. He prefers flat ground, predictable weather, and soft beds. In short, he has conquered the chaos of life, only to make life not worth living. Nietzsche's critique was not of pleasure itself, but of the way comfort becomes a substitute for meaning. When the human spirit is no longer challenged, it withers. The last man lives without struggle, and so without growth. He never risks failure, and therefore never achieves greatness. He believes he is free because nothing hurts him, yet he is imprisoned by his own avoidance of pain. Nietzsche warned that this state of gentle decay would be the ultimate consequence of nihilism. When a society loses belief in higher values but still craves happiness, it creates a culture of distraction, a constant search for small pleasures that never fully satisfy. The last man fills his days with noise, but beneath the surface lies silence. He is not oppressed by tyrants, but by emptiness. Not enslaved by chains, but by comfort. This is why Nietzsche's writing still feels prophetic today. The last man is not a distant figure. He is all around us. He is in the quiet addiction to screens, in the dull pursuit of popularity, in the fear of discomfort disguised as contentment. He is the person who feels safe but hollow, calm but numb, surrounded by abundance yet starved for meaning. Nietzsche believed that the antidote to this decay was not a return to the past, but a leap beyond it. The only cure for the last man's sickness is the rediscovery of becoming, the will to strive, to create, to overcome. He wrote that man is something that shall be overcome, meaning that humanity must never see itself as finished. The last man believes evolution has ended. The free spirit knows it has just begun. But this transformation comes with suffering. To awaken from comfort is to feel again, to rediscover longing, pain, and hope. Nietzsche's philosophy is not an invitation to misery, but to vitality. He wanted life to be lived dangerously, not recklessly, but intensely. He wanted humanity to trade safety for significance, comfort for creation. Yet Nietzsche knew how seductive comfort could be. The last man's world feels peaceful. It's stable, pleasant, predictable, and that's what makes it so deadly to the human spirit. For in peace without challenge, the instincts that drive creativity and passion begin to die. Nietzsche described this death as the slow cooling of existence, a universe that still glows but no longer burns. He feared that civilization would trade its fire for warmth, that humanity would prefer comfort to greatness. And once that choice was made, he warned, we would stop creating gods and start creating distractions. The sacred would be replaced by the entertaining. Wonder would give way to convenience. But Nietzsche also believed that within every era of decay lies the seed of renewal. From the ruins of comfort, a new type of human could arise, one who refuses to blink, who dares to feel the full weight of existence and still says yes. The last man is not destiny. He is a warning, a mirror held up to our age. He reminds us that the greatest danger to the soul is not suffering, but numbness, that to live fully means to accept both pain and possibility. Nietzsche's call was not to reject comfort entirely, but to stop mistaking it for life. Take a moment to imagine what it means to be truly awake, to feel the pulse of existence in all its beauty and terror, to love something enough to suffer for it, to live not as the last man but as the one who still dares to climb. Because comfort, when it becomes a cage, is only broken by creation, and the will to create, that mysterious force at the heart of all life, was what Nietzsche called the will to power. Will to power, the pulse beneath all life. Nietzsche never meant for the will to power to sound like domination or tyranny. That's how it's often misunderstood, as if it were about conquering others. But Nietzsche's vision was subtler, deeper, and far more unsettling. The will to power was not about ruling the world. It was about the force that moves the world, the hidden current beneath every act of creation, struggle, and becoming. He saw it as the essence of life itself. Every organism, from the simplest cell to the most complex mind, strives not merely to survive but to expand, to grow, to transform, to impose form upon chaos. Life doesn't just want to exist. It wants to express itself. It wants to overcome resistance, to shape the world in its own image. For Nietzsche, this impulse, this will to assert, create, and shape, was the fundamental reality, not reason, not morality, not even survival. Survival was only one expression of a deeper drive, the will to grow stronger, to expand one's influence, to become more than what one is. Where I found the living, he wrote, there I found the will to power. He meant that beneath every desire, every goal, every instinct lies this primal push, the urge not just to live, but to thrive. The artist feels it when transforming emotion into beauty. The scientist feels it when bending the mysteries of nature toward understanding. The child feels it in the simple joy of discovery. The will to power is not cruelty. It is creativity. It is the breath of life itself, constantly reaching toward more. Nietzsche saw that everything alive is engaged in this dance of expansion and resistance. Even our thoughts, our values, our art. They are not disinterested pursuits of truth, but expressions of power. Every philosophy, every religion, even every moral code, is an attempt by a particular type of life to assert itself, to say, this is what matters, this is what must be. It was a radical reversal of perspective. Truth, he suggested, is not the goal of thought, power is, but not power in the political sense. Power as the ability to create, to define, to impose order on chaos without pretending it's absolute. The world, Nietzsche said, is not built from matter or spirit, but from the interplay of countless wills, each striving, colliding, transforming, creating the endlessly shifting pattern we call reality. This is why Nietzsche rejected the old moral dichotomies of good and evil. He saw them as human inventions designed to restrain the will to power, systems built by the weak to protect themselves from the strong. Morality, he argued, had often been used to tame life rather than elevate it. The will to power, however, celebrates life's fullness, its cruelty and beauty, its tragedy and triumph, without apology. He admired strength, not because it conquered others, but because it affirmed existence without needing justification. To Nietzsche, weakness was not about physical frailty, but about fear, the refusal to create, to take risk, to say yes to life as it is. The will to power calls for courage, not the courage to dominate, but the courage to become. But this philosophy comes with a price. To embrace the will to power is to give up the comfort of stability. It means accepting that life is not a steady climb toward peace, but an endless struggle toward transformation. It's not about victory, it's about motion. The artist never finishes their masterpiece. The philosopher never finds the final truth. The self is never complete. It is always becoming. Nietzsche once wrote, "A living thing seeks above all to discharge its strength." This idea carries an unsettling implication that suffering, chaos, and conflict are not failures of life. They are its conditions. Life thrives not in comfort, but in challenge. To live fully, we must not flee struggle, but need it. Without resistance, the will to power has nothing to push against, and therefore no reason to grow. This idea changes everything about how we see strength. It is not about control, it is about transformation. A river does not dominate the rocks it flows over. It wears them down through persistence. A flame does not conquer darkness by fighting it, but by shining. In the same way, Nietzsche's will to power is the inner light that pushes life to continually reshape itself, to find new forms of beauty and meaning even in ruin. But Nietzsche also saw how this energy could be misused. When people lose sight of creation, the will to power becomes corrupted into the will to dominate. It becomes political, ideological, tyrannical. History is full of those who mistook destruction for strength. Nietzsche warned that true power is not in control, but in self-overcoming, the constant act of outgrowing one's own limits. To live with the will to power is to see life as art, not as something to endure, but as something to shape. Each decision becomes a brushstroke, each failure a lesson in creation. It's a philosophy of active living, of saying yes to the totality of existence, joy, pain, triumph, loss, and turning it into form. This is why Nietzsche despised resignation and despair. To give up, to numb oneself, to shrink from life's intensity, that was the true sin against existence. For even in tragedy, the will to power continues to pulse. Even in the ruins, life still strives. It wants to rise again, to redefine itself. To live fully is to join that pulse consciously, to live as if creation itself flows through you. Take a moment to imagine that. The force that drives galaxies, that breaks the seed open, that pulls the tide and sparks thought in your brain, that same force moves through you. The will to power is not something you have. It's something you are. And to recognize that is to awaken from passivity into creation. This realization leads to both liberation and burden. For if all life is will to power, then meaning is not given. It is made. And every act of creation is also an act of destruction, clearing space for something new. Nietzsche saw this as the eternal rhythm of existence, life perpetually destroying and remaking itself in a cosmic dance of power and transformation. And from this dance comes a new kind of morality, one no longer bound by obedience, but by growth. A morality not of submission, but of becoming. A morality that dares to move beyond good and evil. Beyond good and evil, when morality outgrows obedience. For centuries, humanity divided the world into two halves, good and evil. We taught ourselves to fear one and worship the other. Our stories, our laws, our religions, all shaped by this sharp line of moral judgment. But Nietzsche looked at that line and saw not truth, but imprisonment. He saw a cage built from centuries of obedience, trapping the human spirit in labels that no longer fit its complexity. To him, morality was never a mirror of divine law. It was a creation, a human invention, born not from truth, but from necessity. We called things good when they served life as we understood it, and evil when they threatened it. Over time, those judgments hardened into commandments. What began as instinct became rule. What was once living became law. Nietzsche believed that the moral codes we inherited were not eternal. They were historical. They reflected the struggles of people long gone, shaped by their fears, their power, their circumstances. But when those circumstances changed, the values remained. Morality, once useful, became obsolete, yet still demanded obedience. He urged humanity to move beyond this, not to abandon ethics, but to outgrow them, to stop living according to borrowed truths. He called this step beyond good and evil. It was not an invitation to chaos, but to maturity, to stand where the gods once stood and create values of our own. This idea was terrifying to many because it removes the safety of moral certainty. To live beyond good and evil means to walk without commandments, to navigate life not through obedience, but through understanding. It demands that we look inward for direction instead of upward for approval. Nietzsche saw obedience as the great enemy of human potential. He argued that moral systems had become tools for control, ways to suppress the strong, the creative, the independent. The herd morality, as he called it, rewards safety over courage, humility over greatness, conformity over individuality. It turns moral virtue into submission and calls it goodness. He didn't mean we should become cruel or indifferent. He meant that morality should no longer be about following. It should be about creating. The true test of character is not whether you obey the rules, but whether you can invent them. To live beyond good and evil is to ask, what makes life stronger, richer, more alive, rather than what will make me appear virtuous? Nietzsche's critique was not a rejection of morality, but a diagnosis of its decay. He believed that old values had lost their connection to life. They no longer inspired greatness. They only maintained order, and order, when it becomes absolute, suffocates the soul. He wanted a morality that grows like a tree, rooted in strength, reaching toward light, flexible in the wind. This new morality would not come from commandments carved in stone, but from individuals daring enough to think for themselves. It would come from what Nietzsche called the free spirits, those who can look at the collapse of old values and see not despair but opportunity. To live beyond good and evil is to recognize that morality is not a law we must obey, but a language we must reinvent. It is to see that good and evil are perspectives, interpretations shaped by our position in life. What strengthens one person may threaten another. What one age calls sin, another may call progress. There are no eternal rules, only shifting horizons of meaning. This realization can feel dangerous, even dizzying, without clear lines. How do we live? Without commandments, how do we choose? Nietzsche would answer, by creating values worthy of our strength. Not values that comfort us, but values that challenge us to grow. He saw morality not as a fence, but as a field. Its purpose was never to keep us contained, but to give us ground to run upon until it's time to leap beyond it. Nietzsche's warning was that the death of old morality would not automatically make us free. It would expose us. The fall of good and evil leaves a silence that demands new voices. In that silence, some will find creativity. Others will fall into nihilism. The difference, he said, lies in strength, in the will to take responsibility for the creation of one's own moral universe. To create your own values is not arrogance. It is the highest form of integrity. It means listening deeply to what affirms life in you and rejecting what diminishes it. It means acting not from guilt or fear, but from a deeper understanding of your own becoming. Nietzsche knew that this path would not be easy. It requires solitude, courage, and the willingness to stand apart from the herd. The world will call it arrogance. It will call it madness. But to Nietzsche, it was the beginning of genuine freedom, the transformation of morality from obedience to artistry. To go beyond good and evil is not to destroy meaning, but to make it alive again. It is to recognize that what we call evil may sometimes be the seed of greatness, that life itself does not fit neatly into human categories. Nature is cruel and creative, destructive and beautiful, all at once. The same energy that builds also burns. To deny one side is to deny the fullness of existence. Nietzsche's dream was for humanity to outgrow the morality of fear and enter a morality of strength, one that celebrates creation, boldness, and the joy of being alive. In his words, the noble soul has reverence for itself. That reverence is not vanity. It is the recognition that life at its highest is its own justification. So take a moment to reflect on this. What values have you inherited without questioning? Which of them serve your growth? and which keep you small. The journey beyond good and evil is not about rebellion for its own sake. It's about rebirth. To live freely is to recognize that morality, like all human creations, is temporary, and that every generation must forge its own. It is to understand that life's greatest moral act may not be obedience, but creation. And in that creation, in the courage to think dangerously and to live authentically, begins the path of the free spirit. The free spirit, learning to think dangerously. The phrase free spirit sounds light, almost romantic, as if Nietzsche were describing someone carefree, detached, and wandering. But in his world, the free spirit was no drifter. It was a warrior of the mind, one who had broken the invisible chains of conformity, faith, and fear. To be free, Nietzsche said, was not to float above life, but to dive into its depths without the safety of dogma. To think dangerously. He believed that most people never think for themselves. They inherit their beliefs, like furniture in an old house, comfortable, familiar, and unquestioned. Society rewards obedience, not originality. Schools teach us what to think, not how. Religion tells us why to live, and morality tells us how to behave. Even rebellion, he noticed, often follows a script. True independence of thought is rare, because it is lonely, uncertain, and costly. The free spirit begins when one tent catches fire, when a person dares to question the foundations of what everyone else calls truth. It begins with the courage to ask, what if everything I've been told is only half the story? Nietzsche didn't mean reckless doubt or denial of all things, but a deliberate, fearless inquiry, the willingness to re-examine even the most sacred ideas and to endure the vertigo that follows. For Nietzsche, thinking dangerously was a form of spiritual courage. It wasn't about destroying belief for its own sake, but about stripping away illusions that prevent life from flourishing. The free spirit asks, do our beliefs make us stronger, more alive, or do they make us smaller, more obedient? He once wrote, the most courageous act is still to think for yourself, aloud. But the path to freedom is not paved with comfort. It begins with unlearning. To become a free spirit, one must first endure the silence that follows when familiar voices fade, the silence after certainty dies. Nietzsche saw most of humanity as afraid of this silence. We prefer noise, moral noise, cultural noise, political noise, anything to fill the void left by lost certainty. But the free spirit learns to listen in that quiet. They learn to trust their own perception, even when it contradicts the crowd. They are willing to risk being misunderstood because the reward, truth as personally discovered, is worth more than belonging. He described this inner transformation like a shedding of skin. The free spirit abandons old layers of identity, religion, nationality, ideology, reputation. These are not destroyed but outgrown. What remains is a person who no longer needs permission to think, to feel, or to live authentically. Nietzsche compared this to climbing a mountain. The air becomes thinner, the company fewer, but the vision clearer. Yet Nietzsche warned that freedom of thought is not the same as rebellion. The rebel often defines themselves against authority, but the free spirit moves beyond it. Rebellion is reaction. Freedom is creation. The free spirit does not fight old gods. They build new worlds. To think dangerously is not to destroy for destruction's sake, but to create space for something more vibrant to grow. This distinction reveals Nietzsche's deeper insight. The opposite of obedience is not chaos, it is mastery. The free spirit is disciplined in their independence. They do not follow rules blindly, but they also do not reject them reflexively. They choose consciously when to obey and when to defy. They live by inner law, one written not by priests or politicians, but by their own becoming. Nietzsche's admiration for the free spirit came from his own life of solitude. He had no university post, no followers during his lifetime, and no public acclaim. He wrote for readers who did not yet exist, people willing to think without certainty, to create meaning from the fragments of a collapsing world. He saw the free spirit as humanity's next evolution, the thinker who could thrive in an age without gods. But freedom of this kind carries a hidden cost. Once you stop relying on external truths, you must bear the weight of your own. There's no one left to blame, no authority to appeal to. Nietzsche called this the burden of freedom. It's the recognition that every belief you hold, every decision you make, is yours alone. The free spirit cannot hide behind obedience, and that, he thought, is the price of genuine independence. Still, Nietzsche saw beauty in that solitude. To stand apart from the crowd is painful, yes, but it's also exhilarating. It is to breathe a purer air, to see with your own eyes, to think with your own mind. It is to stop being a copy and become an original. He wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." The free spirit discovers that why within themselves, not from tradition or faith, but from the deep pulse of life itself. The danger, Nietzsche warned, is that society does not welcome such people easily. The free spirit disrupts comfort. They are often called arrogant, immoral, or mad. But what the world calls arrogance is often simply independence. What it calls immorality is often courage. Nietzsche compared them to lightning, dangerous, unpredictable, but the source of illumination. To think dangerously, then, is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of love. Love for truth, love for life, love for the possibility that the world could be richer than we imagine. The free spirit is not an enemy of humanity, but its next possibility, a person who shows what it means to live without fear of one's own mind. Nietzsche believed that such thinkers are rare because they are forged in fire, the fire of doubt, exile, and self-confrontation. They must learn to be their own teachers, their own judges, their own source of meaning. They do not wait for permission to exist authentically. They simply begin. Take a moment to imagine this kind of freedom, to think without fear, to believe without coercion, to act not from habit but from conviction. That is what Nietzsche meant by learning to think dangerously. It's not about breaking rules recklessly, but about daring to face the world as it is, uncertain, complex, and alive, and to still say yes, because the free spirit's rebellion is not against the world. It is for it, for the possibility that life can be lived more honestly, more creatively, more awake. And as Nietzsche's thought deepened, he began to see this kind of thinking not only as philosophy, but as art. The philosopher, he wrote, must learn from the artist to shape ideas as one shapes color or sound, to transform existence through creation. The philosopher as artist, creating truth instead of finding it. Nietzsche once wrote, "We have art so that we may not perish from the truth." At first glance, this sounds like a confession of fragility, as if art were an escape from reality. But Nietzsche meant something deeper. He believed that truth itself is not something we find waiting for us, like a buried treasure. It is something we create. The philosopher, he said, is not a discoverer of truth, but an artist who shapes it. For centuries, philosophy saw itself as the pursuit of objective knowledge. Plato imagined eternal forms. Descartes sought certainty through reason. Theologians found truth in revelation. But Nietzsche shattered this mirror. He argued that truth, as we understand it, is a human construction, a set of metaphors and symbols that once served life, but over time hardened into dogma. To live truthfully, he said, is not to cling to these frozen forms, but to participate in their recreation. In Nietzsche's world, the philosopher and the artist share the same task, to give form to chaos. Both stand before the rawness of existence and impose pattern, rhythm, and meaning. But while most philosophers claim to describe reality, Nietzsche urged them to admit their role as creators. Every great philosophy, he said, is a confession of its creator. When a thinker speaks of truth, they are really speaking of themselves, their instincts, their temperament, their vision of life. This realization is not meant to discredit philosophy, but to elevate it. For Nietzsche, to acknowledge the creative nature of thought is to free it from pretense. Once we stop pretending that our ideas are universal, we can begin to create them honestly, as expressions of the will to power, as art that enriches existence rather than enslaving it to false absolutes. To think, for Nietzsche, was to sculpt. Ideas were not discoveries but inventions, tools for shaping reality, not mirrors of it. He saw that truth, like art, could never be neutral. Every interpretation is guided by emotion, perspective, and will. Even science, which claims objectivity, operates through the creative ordering of the world. Facts do not speak. We make them speak. The philosopher, then, is an artist whose medium is thought, an architect of perception. But what does it mean to create truth? It does not mean lying or fabricating fantasies. Nietzsche despised deception that weakens life. Creation for him is the opposite. It's the act of affirming life through meaning. When we create truth, we give shape to the world so that it becomes bearable, even beautiful. It's the recognition that while reality may be indifferent, the human spirit can still paint it with significance. Nietzsche believed this creative act was the highest expression of freedom. It was what separated the free spirit from the herd. Ordinary minds seek truth as security, a place to rest, to stop questioning. But the philosopher as artist lives without such rest. They embrace the flux of existence, knowing that all meaning is provisional. They build, destroy, and rebuild their truths endlessly, not out of despair, but out of vitality. He compared this process to music. In music, there is no true melody, only expression, harmony born of tension, beauty born of movement. To live as an artist-philosopher, then, is to treat life itself as composition, to allow contradictions to coexist, to make dissonance meaningful, to find rhythm in uncertainty. This was Nietzsche's rebellion against the philosopher's old dream of timeless truth. He saw that obsession with permanence as life-denying, a fear of change disguised as knowledge. The world, he said, is not static but alive, and any truth that refuses to evolve becomes false. Real wisdom, therefore, lies not in finding eternal answers, but in creating ever deeper questions. The philosopher as artist accepts this dance. They are not afraid to contradict themselves, because contradiction is life speaking through different moods. Nietzsche himself wrote in aphorisms, fragments that seem to collide, provoke, and transform as you read them. He refused to build a single, complete system of thought because to do so would be to fossilize it. "I mistrust all systematizers," he said. "The will to a system is a lack of integrity." And yet, for all his criticism of reason, Nietzsche did not despise thought. He loved it, but he wanted it to live. He wanted philosophy to breathe like art, to sing again after centuries of silence. In his eyes, the philosopher should not be a priest of logic, but a composer of perspectives. Their task is not to discover what is, but to imagine what could be. This is why Nietzsche's writing feels alive even today. He didn't build monuments. He built fires. He wanted thought to burn away pretense, to illuminate new paths, to make the world shimmer again with possibility. His goal was not to comfort the reader, but to awaken them, to remind us that every belief we hold is a brushstroke on the canvas of existence, and that we are always free to paint anew. But such freedom comes with risk. To live as an artist of truth means abandoning the illusion of certainty. It means accepting that meaning is something we must continually recreate. Many find this unbearable. They want a truth that endures, a meaning that guarantees. Nietzsche would say, that is the longing for comfort, not for life. The artist-philosopher is strong enough to live without guarantees, to find beauty in uncertainty itself. And that is perhaps the heart of Nietzsche's thought, that truth and art are not opposites, but allies. Both are creative responses to chaos. Both are acts of defiance against despair. To create meaning is to declare that existence, for all its pain and ambiguity, is still worth affirming. Take a moment to imagine that kind of existence, where every thought is a brushstroke, every act a note in a symphony of becoming, where truth is not something outside of you, but something born from the rhythm of your own strength, your own vision. Nietzsche believed that when we embrace this creative role, life itself becomes art. The philosopher stops searching for final answers and begins composing living questions. Existence ceases to be a puzzle to solve and becomes a canvas to fill, a performance to be lived. And from this act of creation, this refusal to bow before fixed truths, comes light in the darkest places. For even in the abyss, the artist finds color. Even in silence, they hear rhythm. And from that rhythm rises a strange figure, a madman carrying a lantern shouting to a world that no longer listens. The madman's lantern, searching for light in the void. In one of Nietzsche's most haunting parables, a madman rushes into a marketplace shouting, "I seek God. I seek God." The crowd laughs. They tease him. Has he gone missing? Has he lost his way like a child? They ask. But the madman doesn't laugh. He lifts his lantern high and cries, "We have killed him, you and I." And the laughter fades. This short passage, only a few paragraphs long, is one of the most profound pieces of writing in modern philosophy. The image of the madman and his lantern has become a symbol of Nietzsche's most terrifying insight that humanity has destroyed the foundation of its own meaning. But what makes this story so powerful is not the declaration that God is dead. Nietzsche had already said that elsewhere. It's the silence that follows it. The madman's cry is not a celebration, it's a lament. He is not proud of the death of God. He is horrified that no one understands what it means. The people in the marketplace still believe they can live as before, with their morals, their laws, their habits, without realizing that the very source of those values has disappeared. They don't feel the loss because the light still lingers, like the afterglow of a star that has already died. Nietzsche saw himself as that madman. He carried a lantern, the light of awareness, into a world that no longer needed it. His madness was not insanity, but clarity. He was the one who saw too soon, who recognized that when belief collapses, the consequences echo through every part of life: our art, our science, our politics, our sense of self. Humanity, he said, had unchained the earth from its sun. When Nietzsche spoke of killing God, he did not mean an act of violence. He meant the slow erosion of belief through centuries of rational thought. Science, philosophy, and humanism had stripped the world of mystery, replacing divine order with human logic. But logic, Nietzsche warned, cannot replace meaning. We may explain how the world works, but not why it matters. The death of God is the death of certainty, and with it, the death of absolute values. The old world, built on faith in divine purpose, dissolves into ambiguity. The question is no longer what is true, but what can still be believed. Nietzsche saw this as a spiritual earthquake, the greatest event in human history, and he feared that humanity was not ready for it. The madman's lantern becomes a haunting metaphor in this context. It represents the last attempt to find light in a world that has gone dark, to search for meaning after meaning itself has been shattered. The tragedy, Nietzsche says, is that we have extinguished the sun and yet still expect to live by its warmth. He asks, how shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? The question is not moral, but existential. If the highest value has been destroyed, where do new values come from? How can humanity justify itself when its greatest source of justification is gone? Nietzsche's fear was that people would try to fill the void with hollow idols, nationalism, consumerism, ideology, all pretending to give meaning, none succeeding. The madman does not offer easy answers. He does not tell us what to believe instead. He simply announces the disaster, the birth of nihilism. Nihilism is not disbelief. It is the collapse of belief. It's the moment when the structures of meaning crumble, but no new structures rise to take their place. It's a world where everything feels equal, and therefore nothing feels worth fighting for. And yet, Nietzsche's madman is not hopeless. After declaring that God is dead, he throws his lantern to the ground, and the light shatters. "I have come too early," he says. "My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way." Humanity, he believed, had not yet felt the weight of this realization. The world still lived in the shadow of faith, unaware of its own emptiness. Nietzsche wrote not to plunge humanity into despair, but to prepare it for what comes after despair. The death of old values, he believed, creates the possibility of new ones. Once we stop pretending that meaning is given from above, we can begin to create it ourselves. The philosopher, the artist, the free spirit, these are the new torchbearers of light. They no longer seek truth as something found, they invent it as something lived. But this creation is not easy. It requires what Nietzsche called spiritual strength, the ability to bear the weight of freedom without collapsing. It means living without guarantees, without divine approval, and still finding beauty in the chaos. The madman's lantern in this sense passes to us. We become the ones who must hold the light. Nietzsche believed that most people would not take up that light. They would turn away, retreating into comfort or distraction. But a few, the few he called the creators, they would face the darkness without fear. And in that darkness, they would begin to build new worlds. The death of God, for them, would not be an end, but a beginning. This is why Nietzsche's madman is not merely tragic, he is prophetic. His despair hides a deeper hope. The hope that humanity can become strong enough to live without illusions. That we can create meaning not because it is given, but because we choose to. The lantern, then, is not only a symbol of loss, it is the promise of rebirth. Take a moment to feel what this image implies. A world once illuminated by one great sun, one God, one truth, one meaning, now glows with countless small lights, each born from human creativity. The age of divine order ends, and the age of human creation begins. But that new dawn, Nietzsche warns, can only come through the courage to face the night. To hold the lantern is to look directly into the void and refuse to turn away. It is to ask not, what is true, but what can I make true through the way I live? The madman's cry still echoes through history. It asks whether we can bear the death of the old gods without collapsing into despair, whether we can transform the silence of heaven into the music of creation, whether we can become at last the authors of our own light. And so Nietzsche's parable ends not in darkness, but in dawn. The madman disappears, his light scattered, his words echoing through time. But the question he leaves behind remains, perhaps the most important one of all. Now that the old light is gone, what will we create to take its place? The mask and the mirror, the art of becoming. Nietzsche believed that the self is not something we are, but something we create. It's not a fixed identity waiting to be discovered, but a living work of art, a performance, a sculpture, an ongoing experiment. And like every artist, we work in contradiction, disguise, and transformation. To become who we are, Nietzsche said, we must first learn to wear the mask. It's a strange thought that the mask reveals rather than hides. But Nietzsche saw it that way. The mask is not deception. It's the medium through which truth expresses itself. Every great thinker, every artist, every person who has shaped history, he wrote, has hidden behind masks, ideas, personas, roles, not to escape their essence, but to give it form. We often think of authenticity as removing the masks we wear, stripping away all illusion until we stand bare and real. But Nietzsche turned that idea upside down. He believed that pure authenticity is impossible, and perhaps even undesirable. To live without masks, he said, would be to dissolve into chaos. The self needs shape, and shape requires artifice. We must choose our masks wisely, not to hide from truth, but to give it style. He once wrote, "Every profound spirit needs a mask, because depth by its nature cannot be shown directly. The mask becomes the bridge between what we are and what we can express. It gives mystery a face and chaos a voice. The philosopher who speaks plainly risks being misunderstood. The one who speaks through masks, Nietzsche believed, can speak in symbols that endure. For Nietzsche, identity was not a truth to be found, but a tension to be managed. We are not born with a fixed self. We become through action, through conflict, through performance. Just as the actor becomes their role through repetition, we become ourselves by the parts we play, by testing, failing, and transforming. To live is to perform one's own becoming. He warned that those who refuse to play any role at all, who cling to an idea of a pure, static self, end up hollow. They confuse consistency with integrity, mistaking stagnation for strength. But life, Nietzsche said, is change. The challenge is not to remain the same, but to become more fully what we are capable of being. Become who you are, he wrote, not as an invitation to self-discovery, but to self-creation. To become who we are, we must first be willing to shed who we have been. This is why Nietzsche saw selfhood as both an art and a struggle. Every new stage of life demands a new mask, a new way of engaging with the world. But behind each mask, something remains, not a fixed essence, but the will to continue creating. He compared this process to art because it requires the same combination of discipline and imagination. The artist knows that creation involves destruction, that every brushstroke changes the canvas, every revision erases a part of what was. So too with the self, growth is always loss. Becoming demands that we let our older selves die gracefully so new ones can emerge. But this continual transformation can be frightening. Many people prefer the comfort of fixed identity, to say, "This is who I am," and stop there. Nietzsche saw that as a form of spiritual laziness, a refusal to face the creative instability of life. To him, the self is a moving target, and freedom lies in motion. The danger is not in changing too much, but in refusing to change at all. That is why Nietzsche valued contradiction. He believed a strong mind should be capable of holding opposing truths, of embodying paradox without breaking. "I am not one man," he said. "I am many. Each perspective, each emotion, each instinct, all part of the larger work of art that is a human life." The philosopher who insists on one truth is like an artist who paints with only one color. To Nietzsche, life was not about harmony, but about composition. The mask and the mirror are symbols of this creative tension. The mask allows us to act, to shape, to give form. The mirror allows us to reflect, to see ourselves as both artist and artwork. But the mirror also deceives. It freezes what is fluid, showing a single frame of something that is always in motion. To look too long into it, Nietzsche warned, is to mistake the reflection for the reality. He used the metaphor of masks to describe even his own writing. His works contradict one another, shift tone, adopt irony, sarcasm, poetry, because Nietzsche never wanted to be trapped by his own voice. He refused to become a disciple of himself. "I am not a man," he said. "I am dynamite." Every sentence he wrote was a spark meant to destroy what came before it, so that something new could arise in its place. And that's the challenge he leaves us, to live artistically, to craft the self as a masterpiece without mistaking it for perfection. Because the moment we believe we've found ourselves, creation stops. The mask hardens, the art dies. Nietzsche's vision of authenticity is not about revealing the real you, but about continuously reimagining what you can be. This philosophy can feel unsettling in a world that prizes stability and certainty. But Nietzsche's point is not to destroy identity. It's to liberate it, to allow us to play with life, to experiment with meaning, to express our contradictions without shame. The self, in his view, is not a prison, but a stage. The question is not, "Who am I?" but "What can I become next?" Take a moment to imagine yourself in that way, as both mask and mirror, both artist and artwork, each experience reshaping you, each failure refining you. Your identity is not a truth to uncover, but a composition in progress, painted by your choices, your passions, and your courage to change. Nietzsche wanted us to live like creators, not spectators, to treat existence itself as an artistic act. Every emotion, every conflict, every contradiction becomes part of the design. The art of becoming is not about control, but about participation. to be both the sculptor and the stone, shaping and being shaped by life. And in that endless act of creation lies the essence of freedom, not the freedom to be, but the freedom to become. Eternal recurrence. Would you live this life again? There is a thought, Nietzsche said, that could crush or transform a person completely. He called it the greatest weight. Imagine, he writes, that one night a demon slips into your room and whispers to you, this life exactly as you live it now. With every joy, every sorrow, every breath, you will have to live again and again and again for eternity. Nothing new, nothing erased. Every moment will return, infinitely. Would you fall to the ground, despairing? Or would you rise and bless the demon who told you? This idea, the eternal recurrence, is not meant to be believed like a scientific theory. It is a test, a mirror, a thought experiment that reveals what kind of person you are. Nietzsche offers it not to describe the cosmos, but to weigh your soul. If the idea horrifies you, if the thought of reliving every pain, every humiliation, every mistake fills you with dread, then perhaps Nietzsche suggests you have not yet learned to love life as it is. But if you can embrace it, if you can say yes to every heartbeat, every struggle, every fleeting joy, then you have achieved something extraordinary. You have transcended resentment, and in doing so, you have affirmed existence itself. For Nietzsche, this was the ultimate test of strength. Anyone can love moments of happiness. It takes divine courage to love the whole, the broken parts, the mistakes, the nights of despair. The eternal recurrence asks, can you affirm life not because it is easy or perfect, but because it is, because its very impermanence, its very repetition, makes it beautiful. Most people, Nietzsche believed, live their lives as if time were a straight line, from birth to death, from beginning to end. We dream of progress, redemption, escape. We believe we are moving towards something final, salvation, perfection, rest. But what if there is no final arrival? What if time is a wheel, not a road? What if everything you flee returns, not as punishment, but as proof that nothing is ever truly lost? In that image, Nietzsche saw a kind of freedom, because if everything returns, then every moment matters infinitely. Every choice, every gesture, every word gains eternal weight. The way you live this instant, right now, becomes the way you will live forever. In a world without eternity, this idea restores it in a new form, not as heaven after death, but as the sacredness of the present. Eternal recurrence is not comfort. It is confrontation. It demands that you look at your life without illusion. Would you endure it again? Could you bear to repeat every mistake, every moment you tried to forget? If not, Nietzsche says, then something must change. The thought is meant to burn away self-deception, to force you to ask, what must I become so that I could live my life again with joy? For most, the answer is painful. We are weighed down by regret, by shame, by the hope that the future will somehow erase the past. But in Nietzsche's vision, there is no erasure. There is only recurrence. The past is not something to escape, but to transform through acceptance. Amor fati, he later called it, the love of fate. To not only endure what happens, but to love it. To say yes even to suffering, because without it, life would lose its depth. To love one's fate means to embrace existence as a work of art, flawed, tragic, and yet infinitely worthy. The eternal recurrence challenges us to live in such a way that if this life were repeated eternally, we would not curse it but celebrate it. Imagine living so fully that you would choose your exact same path again. Every error, every heartbreak, every victory, not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. Nietzsche believed that such love would transform the soul. It would lift you beyond despair, beyond guilt, beyond resentment. You would no longer crave escape or redemption. You would no longer ask life to justify itself. You would become life's justification. You would become, as he said, the yes-sayer, one who blesses existence not for what it promises, but for what it is. This idea also exposes a quiet paradox. If time repeats, then you cannot change the past. Yet the knowledge of recurrence can change how you live now. The test is not about metaphysics, but transformation. It invites you to live each day as though you would live it again forever, to treat every moment as sacred, every decision as eternal. The goal is not to fear recurrence, but to will it, to say, "Let it come again, I would choose this." That is the height of Nietzsche's vision, a morality beyond guilt, a spirituality without salvation. To affirm life so completely that you could embrace even its repetition is to love fate, to dance with necessity. This, he thought, is what it means to be free. Eternal recurrence strips away the illusions of progress and redemption. It leaves only the raw material of existence, your choices, your experiences, your will. It confronts you with a simple question: do you love life enough to live it again? Not just the highs, but the lows. Not just the beauty, but the terror. If you can answer yes, Nietzsche says, you have passed the deepest test. You have become capable of amor fati, the love that transforms suffering into meaning. You have become the artist of your own eternity. Take a moment to feel what that means. Every regret becomes a lesson you would willingly learn again. Every pain becomes a note in the music of your becoming. To live as though time were circular is to stop waiting for a better life and start creating one in this very moment. Perhaps Nietzsche never meant us to believe in eternal recurrence literally. Perhaps he meant it as a mirror to show us what it means to affirm life without condition. Because when you can say yes to life eternally, when you can whisper to the demon, "Do it again," you are no longer its victim, you are its creator. And in that moment of acceptance, Nietzsche says, the human being steps beyond fear and into eternity, not the eternity of endless time, but of timeless affirmation. The thought of eternal recurrence is not meant to comfort or terrify. It is meant to awaken, to remind us that meaning does not come from escape or transcendence, but from the courage to live fully, again and again, as if for the first time. And in that endless affirmation, in that eternal yes to existence, begins something new, a way of loving life that no longer resists its cycles but dances with them. Amor fati, loving fate without resistance. There is a kind of love that transcends pleasure, hope, and even desire. Nietzsche called it amor fati, the love of fate. It is not the love of what is easy, nor the sentimental acceptance of destiny. It is something harder, deeper, more courageous to look at every event, every loss, every pain in your life, and say, yes, let it be so again. To most, this sounds impossible. We are taught to resist pain, to regret mistakes, to wish the past were different. But Nietzsche saw this resistance as the root of suffering. Life becomes unbearable not because it hurts, but because we refuse to let it be what it is. We rage against what we cannot change, and in doing so, we double our pain. Amor fati is the cure for that resistance, not by escaping the storm, but by learning to dance in its rain. Nietzsche's vision of life was not gentle. He saw existence as turbulent, filled with struggle, loss, and impermanence. But he also saw beauty in that turbulence. To love fate is to recognize that life's pain and joy are inseparable, that the flower and its thorn grow from the same stem. Every joy we cherish exists because of the suffering that shaped it. Every strength we possess was born from what once broke us. Amor fati, Nietzsche wrote, let that be my love henceforth. Not resignation, but affirmation. Not tolerance, but delight. It is the bold acceptance of everything that happens, not only the light, but also the shadow. To say yes even to heartbreak, to illness, to failure, to death, because to wish any part of it away would be to wish life itself away. To love fate is to see necessity as art. Think of the artist painting not on a blank canvas, but on one already marred by imperfections, stains, cracks, rough textures. The artist doesn't erase them. They work with them, turning flaws into composition. Life, Nietzsche believed, is the same. Fate is the canvas. Our will is the brush. Amor fati is the art of painting beauty with whatever colors reality gives us. Nietzsche's own life tested this philosophy. He suffered from illness, isolation, heartbreak, and despair. His body failed him. His friendships crumbled. His books went unread. Yet even through suffering, he never turned against life. "I want nothing to be different," he wrote, near the end of his sanity. "Not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. I want to learn to see as beautiful what is necessary in things." To live with amor fati means to live without bitterness. It means looking back at your life and realizing that nothing was wasted. Not the failures, not the heartbreaks, not even the mistakes. Everything in some way was a part of the necessary unfolding that led you here. The difficult moments were not detours from your path. They were the path. This doesn't mean we stop striving or caring. Amor fati doesn't ask us to accept injustice or laziness. It asks for something more subtle, the courage to act fully, knowing that whatever happens afterward is part of the story we were meant to live. To do our best without demanding that the universe reward us for it. To love the process even when it breaks us. This idea connects deeply to Nietzsche's earlier thought, the eternal recurrence. If you were to live this life infinitely, would you still love it? Amor fati is the answer that redeems that question. To love your fate is to live as if you would choose it again and again, forever. To look at your life, not as something happening to you, but as something being created through you. There's a quiet heroism in this acceptance. It transforms tragedy into participation. When life wounds you, you don't ask, "Why me?" but "What now?" You stop treating the universe as an adversary and begin to see it as a collaborator. Amor fati turns suffering into strength, not by denying it, but by integrating it into the meaning of existence. Nietzsche knew how difficult this love is. It asks everything of you, every ounce of courage, every fragment of honesty. It means looking at your scars and saying, "I would not erase them." It means forgiving fate for what it has taken, and even thanking it for what it has made possible. To love life, he said, is to love even its necessity. This attitude doesn't make pain disappear. It transforms your relationship with it. Instead of asking life to be easy, you begin to ask yourself to be strong. Instead of fleeing discomfort, you let it deepen you. Amor fati doesn't remove suffering, it gives it meaning. The tragedy of existence becomes its music, its rhythm, its dance. There's a strange peace that comes from this love, not the peace of still waters, but of an ocean that accepts its own storms. When you love your fate, you no longer need to control everything. You begin to trust the flow of events, not because you believe they will make you happy, but because you know they are real, and reality, Nietzsche believed, is always worth affirming. To love fate is to surrender without defeat, to yield without despair. It's the quiet strength of saying yes when the world expects you to curse. It's the wisdom to see that meaning is not given by life, but given to life by you. Take a moment to reflect on what that means. Every hardship you've endured, every ending you didn't want, every detour you thought was a mistake. What if all of it was necessary? What if each moment, painful or beautiful, carried the same sacred weight? What if nothing could be otherwise? To love fate is not to love suffering for its own sake, but to love the wholeness of life, to say yes to the totality, to the sum of everything that made you who you are. Nietzsche saw this as the highest form of affirmation, the mark of the truly strong spirit. Because when you can say yes to everything, to loss, to joy, to imperfection, you are no longer bound by fear or regret. You are free. And from that freedom comes something greater, the understanding that suffering is not your enemy, but your sculptor. That pain, when embraced, becomes the force that shapes depth, resilience, and wisdom. In loving fate, you become its artist. Nietzsche believed this love was not only possible, but necessary, the key to transforming existence from burden into celebration. And those who learn it, he said, will no longer curse life for what it takes, but thank it for what it gives. Because amor fati is more than acceptance. It is reverence. It is the moment when you no longer wish the world were different because you have learned to love it as it is. Suffering as sculptor, why pain creates depth. Nietzsche once said, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." But this famous line, repeated endlessly, has lost its edge. To Nietzsche, it was not a slogan of comfort. It was a challenge, almost a warning. He believed that suffering is not an accident in life, but its very sculptor. It cuts, refines, and deepens. Without pain, there can be no greatness, no wisdom, no art, no true individuality. We tend to think of suffering as something to eliminate, a problem to solve. We build entire systems, moral, political, technological, to minimize discomfort. But Nietzsche saw danger in that pursuit. Beware, he wrote. When you fight pain too well, you may also destroy your strength. He believed that the human spirit, like a muscle, grows only when it is tested, when it resists, when it endures, when it breaks and heals stronger than before. To understand this, imagine a sculptor at work. The block of marble doesn't ask to be struck. It doesn't understand the purpose of the hammer, but the artist sees what the stone cannot. The form hidden within. Every blow, every fracture brings that vision closer to reality. For Nietzsche, suffering works in much the same way. Pain, he said, is the hammer of existence. It shapes us into what we are capable of becoming, even when we cannot yet see what that is. He saw this truth, not as metaphor, but as lived experience. Nietzsche's own life was a series of wounds. His health failed, leaving him in constant agony. His friendships collapsed. His love was unreturned. His writings were ignored, mocked, or misunderstood. Yet out of that pain came the fire of his thought. His suffering did not destroy him. It sculpted him into one of the most profound voices in philosophy. To live, he said, is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. Nietzsche rejected the idea that suffering should be avoided or explained away. Religions, he thought, had tried to give pain a moral meaning, to say it was punishment or purification. But he wanted something different, a meaning that didn't depend on guilt or redemption. He wanted us to see suffering not as something to endure for a reward, but as the reward itself, as the creative force that gives life depth. He wrote, "You must have chaos in yourself to give birth to a dancing star. Chaos, uncertainty, pain, doubt, is not the enemy of creation but its womb. Every artist, every thinker, every person who has done something extraordinary has faced moments of despair. Those moments are the price of vision. Without them, the soul remains flat, untested, unshaped." But Nietzsche didn't romanticize suffering. He didn't say all pain is good. Pain without transformation, he warned, becomes resentment, a poison that turns inward. It's not suffering itself that creates greatness, but what we do with it. When pain breaks us, we can either curse life or deepen our relationship with it. The difference lies in perspective. The weak spirit, he said, flees pain, hides from it, blames others for it. The strong spirit learns to interpret pain differently. It doesn't ask, why me, but what for. It turns suffering into knowledge, and knowledge into strength. One must still have chaos in oneself. Nietzsche reminds us not to drown in it, but to master it. Nietzsche believed that without suffering, human beings would become shallow, comfortable, but empty. He saw in modernity a dangerous softness, a desire for safety over meaning, for pleasure over passion. We want happiness without struggle, success without failure, virtue without sacrifice. But he knew that ease breeds mediocrity. Only through great suffering, he wrote, has humanity ever achieved greatness. Think of the mountain climber, the poet, the revolutionary. Their victories are not in avoiding pain, but in transforming it, in finding beauty within difficulty. For Nietzsche, this transformation is the essence of creation. The artist paints not because life is pleasant, but because it wounds. The philosopher thinks not because the world is clear, but because it confuses. The lover loves not because love is safe, but because it threatens to break the heart, and through that breaking, reveals its depth. Suffering, for Nietzsche, is also the antidote to illusion. When life hurts, the masks fall away. We see what truly matters. Comfort can lull us into forgetting who we are. But pain wakes us. It strips away pretense. It reminds us that we are alive, fragile, temporary, and yet capable of immense endurance. That reminder, Nietzsche believed, is the birthplace of authenticity. He saw tragedy, especially in Greek drama, as the highest form of art because it confronts suffering without denying it. The Greeks didn't turn away from the horror of existence. They turned it into beauty. Through tragedy, they learned to say yes to life, even in its darkest moments. That is what Nietzsche admired most, not the elimination of suffering, but the courage to face it with artistry. To love fate, to say yes to suffering, to see pain as sculptor, these are all parts of Nietzsche's greater vision of life affirmation. He wanted humanity to grow strong enough to bless existence, not because it is easy, but because it is profound. The deepest souls, he said, are those who have faced the greatest storms and emerged saying, "Still, I love life." This doesn't mean glorifying hardship or chasing pain. It means accepting that pain is the cost of consciousness, the shadow that gives light its meaning. It means refusing to live like polished stone, untouched and perfect, when life is asking you to become sculpture, raw, carved, imperfect, alive. Take a moment to think about your own life. The times when suffering seemed unbearable. Perhaps those moments, though brutal, shaped the deepest parts of you. Perhaps they carved your empathy, your strength, your vision. Nietzsche would say they revealed your depth, the depth that comfort could never reach. Because suffering, when embraced consciously, becomes transformation. It makes the soul resilient, complex, alive with texture. It teaches us to endure, to create, and to love life not despite its pain, but because of it. Nietzsche's philosophy is not an invitation to despair. It's an invitation to courage, to stop asking the world for ease and start asking ourselves for greatness. Pain, he said, is the sculptor of the spirit, and only through that shaping can we become something worth enduring forever. To live as Nietzsche imagined, to say yes to suffering, is not to be defeated by life's weight, but to be refined by it. To let pain carve meaning into the surface of existence until, at last, we see it for what it is, the hand of the sculptor, shaping us into what we are meant to become. The child, the final metamorphosis of freedom. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche describes three transformations of the spirit, three stages through which a person must pass on the path to true freedom. The first is the camel, who bears the heavy burden of duty and tradition. The second is the lion, who rebels against the old masters and declares, "I will." But the final transformation, the one Nietzsche called the most sacred, is the child. Why a child? What does a child have that even the strongest lion does not? The lion has courage, strength, the will to break chains, but the child has something greater, the ability to create. The child represents innocence regained, the freedom to say yes to life without fear, to begin again without resentment. The camel endures, the lion destroys, but the child invents, and in that invention lies the highest expression of freedom. Nietzsche's image is simple yet profound. The spirit must first learn obedience, then rebellion, and finally play. The camel carries the weight of "thou shalt," the inherited rules of morality, religion, and duty. The lion must fight against them, roaring, "I will," tearing down what no longer serves life. But destruction is not enough. If the lion stops there, it becomes trapped in negation, forever defined by what it rejects. The child, however, goes beyond negation. It forgets the battle and starts to create. To become the child is to regain wonder, to see the world not as something finished, but as something to be shaped. The child does not ask for meaning. It gives meaning. It plays with existence as an artist plays with color, transforming the ordinary into the miraculous. Nietzsche saw in this state the culmination of his entire philosophy, the affirmation of life, unburdened by guilt, fear, or resentment. The child's play is not naive. It is sacred. In play, Nietzsche found the essence of creativity itself, the ability to act without justification, to create for no reason other than joy. To play is to participate in life's flow without trying to control it. The child's laughter, he believed, is more powerful than the lion's roar because it transforms necessity into celebration. Think of what it means to live this way, without the heaviness of the past, without the constant need for purpose. The child does not live according to rules. It invents them, breaks them, and invents them again. This is not chaos, but art, the art of being. It is the spirit of eternal renewal, the rhythm of yes. But reaching this stage is not easy. Most people remain trapped in the earlier metamorphoses. Some stay camels, endlessly carrying the burdens of duty and expectation. They live by thou shalt never, daring to ask why. Others become lions, defiant and free, but still defined by opposition. They know what they hate, not what they love. To become the child is to move beyond both, to no longer fight against the world, but to dance with it. Nietzsche believed that the greatest human beings are those who learn to play after tragedy, those who, after breaking their chains, do not sink into bitterness, but rise into creativity. He called this the spirit of the new beginning. The child is the symbol of the reborn self, the person who can face the world's absurdity and still smile. This transformation has nothing to do with regression or childishness. It is not about returning to ignorance, but about transcending cynicism. The child is not unscarred. It has simply learned to turn its scars into imagination. In Nietzsche's language, it has achieved amor fati, the love of fate, and now plays joyfully with what it once resisted. In the eyes of the child, the world is no longer divided into good and evil, success and failure, gain and loss. There is only the wonder of experience itself. To live like this is to become an artist of existence, to treat each moment as a brushstroke in an infinite painting. Nietzsche saw in this final metamorphosis the antidote to nihilism. When belief collapses, when old values die, we can either despair or begin again. The child begins again. It does not cling to the ruins of the old world. It builds castles from their stones. It does not need permission to create meaning, because it understands that meaning is not found, it is made. To live as the child is to live playfully, but not carelessly. It means to act with intensity and presence, as if every moment were both the first and the last. It means to say yes to the totality of life, not because it is perfect, but because it is possible. The child is the embodiment of possibility. There is also something profoundly spiritual in this state. The child carries no resentment, no guilt, no debt to repay. It is not weighed down by memory. It forgets easily, not from weakness, but from strength. To forget, Nietzsche wrote, is an active power. It is how we remain capable of becoming new. The child forgets so that it may continue to create. Nietzsche's call was not to innocence of ignorance, but to innocence of becoming. The world is not something to be solved, but something to be played with, like clay in the hands of a creator. The child is not merely free, it is freedom. It is the spirit returned to itself. After the long journey through obedience and rebellion, now ready to say the purest and most powerful word in Nietzsche's philosophy. Take a moment to imagine living as that child, not innocent because you know nothing, but innocent because you've embraced everything. Imagine facing each sunrise not as repetition, but as discovery. Imagine having the courage to forget your pain without denying it, to love life not as a task, but as a game you're blessed to play. This, Nietzsche believed, is the highest form of the human spirit, to be childlike after wisdom, to play after tragedy, to say yes after saying no, to create meaning endlessly, joyfully, without fear of the void. And so, the journey of the spirit comes full circle. The camel bore its burdens. The lion destroyed its masters, but only the child creates anew. Only the child turns necessity into play. Only the child transforms freedom into art. Because to become the child, Nietzsche says, is not to escape life. It is to love it so deeply that every moment becomes a beginning. The herd instinct. Why conformity feels safe. Nietzsche saw something unsettling in humanity's pursuit of safety. Beneath our civilizations, beneath our morality and progress, he sensed an ancient instinct, the herd instinct. It is the pull to belong, the comfort of sameness, the soft gravity that draws the individual back into the crowd. We call it community, society, decency, even goodness. But Nietzsche called it what it truly is, a longing to escape the burden of freedom. To him, the herd instinct was not evil. It was natural, even necessary. In our earliest days, it was what kept us alive. Unity meant survival. Alone, a human was fragile. Together we were strong, but as centuries passed, that instinct grew beyond survival. It began to govern our values, our beliefs, and our very sense of what is right, and that, Nietzsche warned, was the beginning of spiritual decline. The herd instinct makes us feel safe, and that is precisely why it's dangerous. When everyone agrees, when everyone moves in the same direction, we feel comforted by belonging. We tell ourselves that we are moral because we follow rules, intelligent because we share consensus, good because we do what others call good. But Nietzsche asked, is that goodness, or is it fear disguised as virtue? He saw that most people do not want freedom. Not truly. Freedom means standing alone, thinking dangerously, taking responsibility for one's own values. That kind of independence is terrifying. It's far easier to let the herd decide what is right and simply follow. The herd promises protection, purpose, identity, but it demands something in return, your authenticity. Nietzsche observed this dynamic everywhere, in religion, in politics, in morality. He saw societies built not on the strength of the individual, but on the conformity of the many. The herd values harmony over truth, obedience over insight, equality over excellence. It worships comfort and calls it peace. It punishes difference and calls it justice. To Nietzsche, these were not virtues, they were symptoms of decline. The most spiritual human beings, he wrote, as the strongest, find their happiness where others would find their destruction, in the labyrinth, in difficulty, in their own mistakes. But the herd fears difficulty, it flees from uncertainty. It clings to what is familiar and calls it sacred. The crowd cannot tolerate those who walk alone because their very existence is a challenge, a reminder of what most people avoid. Nietzsche didn't despise the herd because he thought himself above it. He despised it because it kills the possibility of greatness. Every genius, every artist, every thinker must eventually face the herd's resistance. The crowd calls their independence arrogance, their difference madness, their truth blasphemy, because the herd cannot stand to see someone live without its approval. And yet, Nietzsche knew the herd is seductive. It whispers with the language of belonging. Don't stand apart, you'll be safer here. That whisper is ancient. It's the echo of our evolutionary past, where exclusion meant death. To resist it takes immense courage. The courage of the lion who says, I will, and the child who says, I create. To resist the herd is to accept loneliness. It is to walk a road where few follow, to bear misunderstanding, even ridicule. But Nietzsche believed this loneliness was the price of becoming fully human. True individuality begins where conformity ends. The herd gives you identity at the cost of your soul. Solitude strips you of identity until you discover your essence. He warned that modern civilization, in its obsession with comfort and equality, was breeding mediocrity. The more we build systems to protect everyone from failure, the more we flatten human potential. The individual has always had to struggle, he wrote, to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. And when that struggle stops, creativity stops too. Nietzsche's criticism wasn't political, it was existential. He didn't want the strong to rule the weak. He wanted everyone to discover their own strength. But that discovery requires risk. The risk of thinking for oneself, of walking alone, of questioning what everyone else takes for granted. To him, the herd's morality was born not of love, but of resentment. It resented those who dared to stand out, those who lived by their own rules. He called this resentment, a subtle poison that turns weakness into virtue. The herd says, "We are good because we are humble. They are evil because they are proud." But this goodness is only disguised envy. It doesn't seek truth. It seeks equality at any cost. It would rather drag the strong down than rise higher itself. Yet Nietzsche did not despair. He believed that even in a world of conformity, there would always be a few who hear a different rhythm, who cannot help but step outside the circle. These individuals are not rebels for the sake of rebellion. They are creators, people who see beyond collective comfort to something higher. They are not against the herd, but beyond it. To stand beyond the herd is to live dangerously, but also vividly. It is to accept that truth is not decided by consensus, that morality is not a vote, that value is not measured by numbers. The herd may call this arrogance, but Nietzsche saw it as honesty, because the path to authenticity cannot be walked in a crowd. Take a moment to imagine what that means. To step beyond the herd is not to reject community, but to transcend dependence on it. It is to be capable of solitude, to hear your own thoughts clearly enough to act on them. It's not isolation, it's strength. Nietzsche's dream was not of a world without the herd, that would be impossible, but of individuals strong enough not to be swallowed by it. He imagined a future where people no longer looked outward for meaning, but inward, where each person became their own source of value, their own light. And so, Nietzsche's question remains, when you feel the pull of the crowd, when the comfort of belonging tempts you to stop thinking, to stop questioning, can you resist it? Can you walk alone without bitterness? Can you bear the silence that follows when you no longer need approval? Because that silence, he believed, is the beginning of true freedom. It is the moment when the herd fades, and the individual begins to hear their own voice. And in that voice lies the seed of something greater, the strength to shape new values, to create beyond conformity, to live authentically. To Nietzsche, the herd instinct is not something to hate, but something to overcome. It's a reminder of where we come from and of what we must rise beyond. For only those who dare to leave the comfort of the herd will ever discover what it means to be free. The priests of resentment, the birth of morality from weakness. Nietzsche once described morality as a battlefield, not between good and evil, but between two kinds of human beings. On one side stood those who loved life, strong, self-affirming, noble spirits who acted from strength, not guilt. On the other side were those Nietzsche called the priests of resentment, the weak, the fearful, the cunning, who could not conquer the strong directly, so they conquered them through ideas. To Nietzsche, these priests were not merely religious figures, but psychological archetypes, representatives of an ancient transformation in human values. They were the ones who, unable to express power outwardly, turned it inward. They created a new kind of weapon, morality, and through it, they changed the course of civilization. In Nietzsche's genealogy of morals, he tells the story of how these priests, out of their weakness, redefined the meaning of good and evil. In the ancient world, the noble saw good as whatever expressed strength, vitality, and excellence, courage, pride, generosity. These were virtues because they flowed from abundance. Evil, by contrast, was what was low, cowardly, base, the failure of life to assert itself. But over time, the powerless, the oppressed, the downtrodden, began to resent their position. They couldn't defeat the noble physically, so they did something more ingenious. They changed the definitions. They declared that humility was good, that meekness was virtuous, that suffering was holy. Power, once celebrated, became evil. Strength became sin. And in this reversal, Nietzsche saw the birth of what he called slave morality. This was not a mere moral shift. It was a revolution of the soul. The priests of resentment weaponized guilt. They taught that suffering was not a natural part of life, but punishment, that pleasure was dangerous, that instinct was sinful, that joy should be restrained. By making people feel guilty for their own strength, they tamed them. Nietzsche saw in this the most subtle and enduring form of control ever invented. The priests could not wield swords, but they wielded something stronger: conscience. They didn't need to command people by force when they could make them command themselves. The result was what Nietzsche called the internalization of man. The wild, instinctive human being turned against himself. The will to power, which once created art, adventure, and greatness, was redirected inward, creating guilt, self-denial, and obedience. Nietzsche did not condemn compassion or kindness outright. What he condemned was the motivation behind them, when pity becomes a disguise for resentment, when helping becomes a way to feel morally superior to others. The priests of resentment, he said, didn't love the weak, they hated the strong. Their morality wasn't born of love, but of revenge. By calling strength evil, they could claim victory without ever fighting. He wrote that resentment was the most creative force of the weak, the ability to invert values. It turns every defeat into a moral triumph. It says, "You may have power, but we have virtue. You may conquer us, but God loves us more." This reversal, Nietzsche believed, poisoned the Western soul. It made humanity ashamed of its instincts, its body, its joy. It taught us to hate what is highest in ourselves and call it sin. What Nietzsche saw then was not just religion, but a psychology of guilt that infected every part of modern life: politics, philosophy, even art. Whenever someone condemns strength, excellence, or beauty in the name of equality or morality, Nietzsche saw the echo of those ancient priests whispering still. Beware, he warned, when the weak begin to call their weakness virtue. But Nietzsche did not admire cruelty. He didn't want the strong to oppress the weak. He wanted the strong to create, to affirm life without shame. What horrified him was not weakness itself, but the way weakness disguises itself as goodness, how resentment hides behind moral language, claiming the authority of virtue while secretly feeding on envy. To free ourselves from this moral inversion, Nietzsche believed, we must learn to recognize resentment in our own hearts. It often appears as moral outrage, the satisfaction we feel when judging others, the subtle pleasure of believing ourselves righteous. He called this the triumph of the herd, the moment when the many, in their weakness, drag down the few who dare to live differently. The priests of resentment turned suffering into a crown and obedience into holiness. They created the idea that suffering purifies, that self-denial brings salvation. To Nietzsche, this was the ultimate lie, a philosophy that teaches life is something to escape, rather than something to embrace. It makes people reject their instincts, mistrust their joy, and call it morality. And yet, Nietzsche also saw in this story a kind of tragic genius. The priests of resentment triumphed not through brute force, but through imagination. They reshaped the human soul. Their victory gave birth to conscience, reflection, even art. Out of suffering came depth. Out of repression came creativity. Humanity became more subtle, more introspective, but also more divided, more guilty, more sick with its own morality. In this paradox lies Nietzsche's haunting insight. The very forces that weakened humanity also refined it. The same resentment that made us turn inward gave birth to our highest culture. But now, he said, we must go further, to overcome the priests without destroying what their struggle created. To Nietzsche, the task of the future is not to return to the brutal simplicity of the ancient world, nor to cling to the guilt-ridden morality of the priests. It is to go beyond both, to create new values born not of weakness or resentment, but of strength and joy, to reclaim the innocence of life, to affirm existence without apology, to live beyond good and evil. Take a moment to reflect on that. How many of our moral judgments are really born from love, and how many from resentment? how much of what we call virtue comes from fear of power, rather than understanding of it. Nietzsche's warning still echoes, beware those who preach humility while craving control, who speak of love while sowing guilt. For behind every system of morality, he believed, there lies a psychology, and often a secret will to power. To recognize this is not to reject morality, but to purify it, to separate compassion from weakness, virtue from resentment, conscience from control. Nietzsche's hope was for a new type of human being, one who could act from fullness, not deficiency, who could love life not because it redeems, but because it creates. The priests of resentment taught us to bow our heads. Nietzsche asks us to lift them, to look the world in the eye and say yes, even to suffering, even to chaos, because only in that yes can we reclaim our will and begin the long journey toward the rebirth of values. Slave morality, how goodness became revenge. To Nietzsche, morality was never universal. It was born from conflict, not between good and evil, but between two kinds of souls. On one side stood the noble, the strong, the life-affirming. On the other stood the weak, the cautious, the wounded. From these two worlds emerged two moralities, the morality of the masters and the morality of the slaves. The noble or master morality arose from abundance. The strong did not ask what was good. They felt it. Good was whatever expressed their power, vitality, and excellence. They admired courage, generosity, creativity, the joy of action. Evil was what they despised: cowardice, weakness, pettiness. Their morality was not born from guilt, but from affirmation. But for those who lacked power, for those crushed under the weight of the strong, such a morality was unbearable. They could not compete on the battlefield of strength, so they built a new battlefield, one of the spirit. They took their suffering, their envy, their humiliation, and turned it inward. And from that inversion of feeling, Nietzsche said, was born slave morality. Slave morality began with resentment, that deep, slow-burning hatred of the powerless. But instead of striking outward, this resentment disguised itself as virtue. The weak could not destroy the strong, so they declared the strong to be evil. Their vengeance was not of sword or fire, but of words and values. Through this moral revolution, everything changed. What had once been signs of strength, pride, ambition, independence, were rebranded as vices, and what had once been signs of weakness, humility, obedience, meekness, were exalted as virtues. The lamb, Nietzsche said, looked at the eagle soaring above and called it evil. The eagle looked down and merely shrugged. This reversal, Nietzsche wrote, was the greatest psychological event in history. It turned life against itself. The slave's morality was not about affirming life, but judging it. It created ideals that made power sinful and suffering sacred. It said, you who enjoy, you who rule, you who create, you are wicked. We who suffer, we who wait, we who obey, we are good. Nietzsche saw this moral inversion as a triumph of the weak, but also a tragedy of the human spirit. It produced civilizations that praised pity over strength, equality over excellence, obedience over freedom. It made guilt the central feeling of the soul, and through guilt, it gave power to those who had none before: the moralists, the priests, the judges. The new moral world was ruled not by warriors, but by guilt-mongers, those who could manipulate shame to control others. A man who once lived boldly, now lived anxiously, questioning his every desire, fearing his instincts, apologizing for his vitality. The weak have conquered, Nietzsche said, not with strength, but with poison. Nietzsche did not deny that this moral revolution had its genius. It created empathy, introspection, and complexity. It made the human soul deeper, capable of reflection and art. But it also made it sick. For when resentment becomes virtue, life itself becomes a burden. People begin to glorify suffering, to believe that to be small, broken, and obedient is to be good. The tragedy, Nietzsche thought, was that the morality of the weak pretends to be selfless, yet it is secretly a form of revenge. Every good person who condemns the strong does so not out of love, but out of envy. Every moral law that says, "Thou shalt not," hides a wish, "Thou shalt not be stronger than me." In this way, the slave's morality takes revenge on life by turning its vitality into sin. Nietzsche believed that much of Western civilization still lives under this shadow. We praise equality and kindness, but secretly we fear greatness. We glorify compassion, yet often use it to control. The herd values safety above all, and the individual who dares to rise above it becomes suspect, even hated. To make others small, Nietzsche wrote, is the secret delight of those who cannot grow. He saw this moral reversal everywhere, in religion, in politics, in culture. It is the morality of the last man, the one who no longer strives, who values comfort over creation, who calls mediocrity virtue because excellence threatens him. The noble spirit, in contrast, asks for nothing but freedom, the freedom to be strong, to create, to affirm. But the slave morality teaches that to stand out is arrogance, to lead is oppression, to desire is sin. And yet Nietzsche's message is not cruelty. He does not call us to trample the weak or reject compassion. His call is to overcome resentment, to stop using morality as revenge, to rediscover joy and strength and generosity in creation, to stop worshiping the virtues of weakness and instead find nobility and vitality. The noble person, Nietzsche said, does not hate the weak. They simply do not build their values upon them. Their goodness does not come from comparison, but from affirmation. They do not need to condemn others to feel righteous. They live fully without guilt, and their virtue radiates from abundance, not deprivation. Nietzsche believed that true moral renewal begins when we ask ourselves, are my values born from strength or from resentment? Do I love what I call good, or do I merely fear what I call evil? It is a frightening question because it forces us to confront the hidden motives behind our virtue, but it is also liberating. When we stop moralizing out of revenge, we rediscover innocence. We stop seeking power over others and begin creating power within ourselves. We stop calling our limitations holy. We stop waiting for heaven to justify us and start affirming life as it is. In the end, Nietzsche's vision is not about rejecting morality, but transforming it. He invites us to move from a morality of reaction to one of creation, to build values that celebrate vitality, courage, and joy instead of guilt and envy, to move from "thou shalt not" to "I will." Slave morality, he said, is the morality of those who cannot say yes to life. It survives by negation, by judgment, by smallness, disguised as goodness. But the higher spirit learns to bless existence, to embrace strength, difference, and creativity without shame. Because to overcome slave morality is not to reject compassion. It is to rediscover joy in creation. It is to love life so fiercely that you no longer need revenge, approval, or apology. You no longer need to be good by someone else's standard. You simply live, and in that living, you become the affirmation that slave morality could never imagine. The Übermensch, humanity's next step. Nietzsche's most misunderstood idea is also his most luminous, the Übermensch, often translated as the overman or superman. To the casual reader, it sounds like a myth of superiority, a call for domination. But Nietzsche's vision was not about conquest of others. It was about transcendence, the overcoming of oneself. The Übermensch is not a ruler, but a creator. Not a tyrant, but a symbol of what humanity could become when freed from its chains, the chains of guilt, conformity, and fear. It is the next step after the death of God, the being who can live without the need for divine validation, who finds meaning not in obedience, but in creation. Nietzsche saw the death of God as both liberation and catastrophe. Without the divine, humanity was left adrift, its moral compass shattered. Old values had lost their meaning, and new ones had yet to be born. Into this vacuum, Nietzsche introduced the Übermensch, not as an ideal to worship, but as a challenge to aspire toward. Man, he wrote, is something that shall be overcome. He imagined humanity as a bridge, not a destination. The human being, as we know it, is an in-between state, no longer animal, not yet divine. We are torn between instinct and intellect, between the earth and the heavens. The Übermensch represents the completion of this bridge, a being who affirms life with such intensity that even suffering becomes part of its beauty. But Nietzsche warned that few could bear this transformation. Most people, he said, would rather cling to comfort than face the void. They would retreat into the safety of the herd, or worse, into nihilism, the belief that nothing has meaning. The Übermensch, however, embraces the void and fills it with meaning of their own making. To live as the Übermensch means to say yes to existence, to every joy, every wound, every cycle of creation and decay. It means to no longer ask why life hurts, but to love it for its depth. The Übermensch does not escape the world. They dance with it. They do not seek perfection. They transform imperfection into art. Nietzsche described this new being not in formulas, but in images. He called the Übermensch the meaning of the earth. While others look to the heavens for salvation, the Übermensch looks downward, not in despair but in reverence. They recognize the sacredness of the ground beneath their feet, of the body, of nature, of becoming itself. In this, Nietzsche rejected both religious and nihilistic worldviews. The religious person says, there is something higher than life. The nihilist says, there is nothing at all. The Übermensch says, there is nothing higher except what I create. That act of creation is what redeems existence. It is art, philosophy, and life fused into one continuous expression. Nietzsche's Übermensch is not born from privilege or power. It is born from struggle. It is forged in the fire of suffering, in the tension between despair and courage. The one who becomes Übermensch does not avoid the abyss. They look into it and find a reflection of themselves. Out of that confrontation comes transformation. This transformation is not moral, but creative. The Übermensch invents new values, not out of resentment, but out of abundance. They do not say, this is good because I fear punishment, or this is evil because I envy strength. They say, this is beautiful because I choose it. Their values come not from obedience, but from joy, the joy of self-overcoming. Nietzsche's imagery of the Übermensch carries deep echoes of his earlier ideas. From amor fati, the love of fate, comes acceptance. From the eternal recurrence comes affirmation. From the child's play comes creation. The Übermensch is all of these united, the being who can live eternally and still rejoice, who can say yes to all that is, even to suffering. It is not a god, not a saint, not a conqueror, but the one who has learned to master themselves so completely that they no longer need to conquer others. The Übermensch is free because they no longer react, they create. They don't ask what life owes them, they ask what they can give to life. Nietzsche believed this self-overcoming was the essence of the will to power. But power, in his sense, was not domination. It was growth, expansion, the drive to express one's fullest potential. Every living thing, he said, seeks to unfold itself, to become more than it was. The Übermensch is that impulse made conscious. The question, then, is not how to become one, but whether we dare to try. For Nietzsche, it was not about achieving perfection, but about continual transformation. Become who you are, he wrote, not who you were told to be, not who the herd expects you to be, but who you must become when all illusions fall away. The journey toward the Übermensch is solitary, but it is not lonely. It is the path of those who create meaning rather than consume it, who love life enough to risk remaking it. They do not flee pain. They use it as raw material for art. They do not seek approval. They embody freedom. In a world addicted to comfort, their existence is a quiet revolution. Nietzsche did not give us a map to this new being. He gave us the wind, a direction, a sense of movement. The Übermensch is not a destination, but a horizon, always shifting, always receding as we approach. The task is not to become perfect, but to become deeper, more vital, more awake. Take a moment to reflect on what that means. To live as the Übermensch is to live without excuses. It is to stop asking for meaning and start creating it. To stop looking for salvation and become your own redemption. It is not arrogance, but courage, the courage to live without guarantees, to say yes to the whole of existence and to yourself. The Übermensch, Nietzsche wrote, is the lightning out of the dark cloud called man. It is not the destruction of humanity, but its transformation, the moment when humankind begins to love the earth again, to create without shame, to live as art. Nietzsche's dream was not for a superhuman species, but for a new spirit, one that transcends resentment, fear, and guilt. The Übermensch is not above humanity. It is humanity finally awake. Because the highest goal, he said, is not to escape life, but to love it so deeply that even its suffering becomes sacred. To become the Übermensch is not to ascend beyond the world, but to say, with a full heart, yes and again, yes. The higher man, responsibility in a godless world. When Nietzsche declared that God is dead, it was not a cry of triumph. It was a warning. The death of God did not mean humanity was free of morality, but that it was free from its foundation. The higher man, Nietzsche believed, would be the one strong enough to live in that aftermath, to bear the weight of a world without divine order, to create meaning where none was given. For Nietzsche, this was the greatest responsibility imaginable. In a godless world, there are no celestial judges, no eternal truths, no cosmic purpose to justify our suffering. And yet life continues, raw, chaotic, indifferent. The higher man does not escape that condition. He embraces it. He stands alone before the abyss and says, I will make meaning myself. The higher man is not the Übermensch fully realized, but the bridge toward it, the rare individual who takes up the burden of freedom after the collapse of faith. He no longer relies on old commandments or external authorities. He becomes both creator and judge, both lawgiver and student of his own soul. Nietzsche saw this as an act of immense courage. The ordinary person seeks comfort in systems, in dogma, in social norms, in collective opinions. But the higher man dares to walk without them. He replaces obedience with creativity, guilt with responsibility, fear with affirmation. He does not reject morality altogether, but reclaims its authorship. To live as the higher man is to carry the weight of meaning alone, without God, without certainty, without rescue. It is not arrogance that drives him, but necessity. If no divine plan exists, then every action becomes an act of authorship. Every decision, however small, shapes the world. The higher man accepts that responsibility, not as burden but as privilege. He is not moral in the old sense. His virtue is not obedience, but integrity. He does not act good because he hopes for reward or fears punishment. He acts out of strength, out of the fullness of his being. The higher man does not follow laws. He creates them through how he lives. But this freedom is dangerous. When God dies, Nietzsche warned, humanity risks falling into nihilism, the belief that nothing matters. For most people, the collapse of old values leads to despair or apathy. They fill the void with distractions, ideologies, or the worship of comfort. The higher man refuses this. He sees nihilism not as an endpoint, but as a test, a cleansing fire through which new meaning must be forged. He does not flee from emptiness. He walks through it deliberately. He asks the terrifying question, if there is no divine meaning, can I create one that is worthy? His life becomes the answer. Every act, every word, every silence becomes a declaration of value. To Nietzsche, this was the essence of greatness. Not power, not conquest, but responsibility. The higher man takes responsibility, not only for himself, but for the absence of God. He becomes, in a sense, a co-creator of existence. His strength is not domination, but affirmation. He does not curse life for its chaos. He gives it structure through his will. And yet, this is not an easy existence. Nietzsche never romanticized it. The higher man is haunted by solitude. He feels the full weight of meaning's fragility. Every value he creates can be destroyed. Every truth he discovers might be an illusion. He walks a tightrope suspended over the abyss, balancing creation and collapse. In this image, Nietzsche saw the modern condition. Humanity no longer believed, yet still yearned for belief. The higher man does not seek comfort in that contradiction. He transforms it into strength. He understands that the absence of divine meaning is not tragedy, but freedom. The universe's silence is not rejection, but invitation. It is in that silence that he begins to speak. He becomes a philosopher, an artist, a creator of worlds. His art replaces his religion. His thought becomes his prayer. His life becomes his temple. He needs no God because he has learned to embody the divine impulse, not as faith, but as creation. To Nietzsche, the higher man was rare, perhaps even tragic. He is condemned to stand apart, to be misunderstood, often ridiculed. The herd will call him arrogant, immoral, or mad. But Nietzsche believed the future depended on such individuals. Civilization advances not through conformity, but through the courage of those who think differently. The higher man is not against morality. He goes beyond it. He replaces divine command with human creation. He replaces blind faith with lucid courage, and in doing so, he becomes responsible for all that once belonged to God: truth, meaning, beauty, purpose. He does not pray for these things. He becomes them. Nietzsche's image of this figure is deeply symbolic. He is not the Übermensch yet, not the fully realized creator, but the one preparing the ground. He clears the ruins of old faith, not to destroy, but to make space for the birth of something higher. He bears the unbearable knowledge that life has no cosmic justification, and yet chooses to live beautifully anyway. The higher man's strength lies not in certainty, but in acceptance. He does not need to know why existence is. He only needs to affirm that it is. In that affirmation, he finds meaning beyond all systems, a meaning that cannot be taken because it was never given. Take a moment to imagine what that means, to live in a world without divine order, yet still act with reverence, to create values, not because you must, but because you can, to take responsibility for existence itself, to become both the question and the answer. That, Nietzsche believed, is the highest form of freedom. The freedom not from responsibility, but for it. The freedom to live without illusions, and yet to love life deeply enough to shape it anew. The higher man stands in the aftermath of the divine and refuses despair. He accepts that the heavens are empty, and in that emptiness, he builds his world. He does not replace God. He replaces dependence. He becomes the artist of existence itself. For Nietzsche, this was the greatest act of love, to take what the gods abandoned and carry it forward in human hands. Apollo and Dionysus, order and chaos in harmony. Long before Nietzsche became the philosopher of the abyss, he was a lover of art, and it was through art that he first glimpsed the secret tension at the heart of life. In The Birth of Tragedy, his earliest and most poetic work, he wrote of two gods who embody the dual nature of existence itself, Apollo and Dionysus. They are not rivals, but opposites bound in eternal dance, order and chaos, reason and passion, form and frenzy. Nietzsche believed that all great art, and perhaps all great living, arises from their harmony. Apollo, the god of the sun, of clarity, symmetry, and reason, represents the human desire for structure. He is the sculptor of dreams, the artist who turns chaos into image, who imposes form upon the formless. Apollo is vision, control, and self-mastery, the part of us that draws lines around the infinite so we can comprehend it. Dionysus, by contrast, is the god of wine, music, and ecstasy. He represents the wild, the irrational, the dissolution of boundaries. In the Dionysian state, The self disappears into the rhythm of life. Individuality dissolves into the collective pulse of nature. He is intoxication, instinct, the heartbeat beneath reason's cage. Nietzsche saw both of these forces as essential. Pure Apollonian order produces sterility. A world too neat, too perfect, too lifeless. Pure Dionysian chaos leads to madness, the loss of self, the flood without form. But when they meet, when reason embraces passion, when order learns to move with chaos, something extraordinary happens. Tragedy is born. For Nietzsche, Greek tragedy was the highest expression of this union. In it, the structured dialogue of the stage, Apollo coexisted with the raw chorus of emotion, Dionysus. The Greeks, he believed, understood something we have forgotten, that beauty does not come from denying suffering, but from transforming it into art. Tragedy was not an escape from pain. It was a celebration of it. Through the balance of Apollo and Dionysus, the Greeks achieved a worldview that could affirm life in all its contradictions. They didn't seek to eliminate pain or chaos. They gave it rhythm, form, and meaning. They danced with it. Nietzsche admired this deeply. To him, tragedy was the most honest art form because it said yes to suffering, not as punishment, but as part of existence music. But he believed modern humanity had lost this harmony. The rise of reason and science, the dominance of the Apollonian, had silenced Dionysus. We built civilizations that worship clarity and control, but forgot how to dance, how to lose ourselves, how to affirm life's wildness. We became spectators of existence, not participants. Nietzsche saw this imbalance as the sickness of modernity. Too much order makes the soul brittle. Too much control starves the instinct. He believed we had caged our Dionysian nature, the creative, chaotic energy that gives rise to passion and art. Without it, we become mechanical, moral, predictable. But without Apollo's shaping light, we would be lost in madness. Life, he said, is not about choosing one or the other, but about uniting them, to dance at the edge of chaos without falling in. To live in that balance is to live artistically. The Apollonian gives clarity to the Dionysian's energy, and the Dionysian gives life to Apollo's precision. Together, they create not a compromise, but a synthesis, a living paradox. The self becomes both architect and dancer, both sculptor and storm. Nietzsche's insight was not merely aesthetic, it was existential. He believed that to live well, one must cultivate this inner duality. Too much rationality suffocates the spirit. Too much passion consumes it. The higher individual learns to let both speak, to think like Apollo and feel like Dionysus, to reason with intensity and create with control. In this tension, Nietzsche found the essence of greatness. Every artist, philosopher, and free spirit must learn this balancing act. The Apollonian disciplines the creative chaos of Dionysus into art. The Dionysian breaks open Apollo's frozen perfection into living motion. One without the other is death, either in madness or in sterility. But together, they make life sublime. This balance is also the key to Nietzsche's larger philosophy, the affirmation of life as it is. Apollo and Dionysus are not metaphors for dualism, but for integration. To affirm existence means to accept both sides, order and chaos, joy and sorrow, creation and destruction, as inseparable. The world, like art, needs contrast to be beautiful. Nietzsche's love of Dionysus, in particular, reveals his deep defiance of pessimism. Where others saw life's suffering as proof of meaninglessness, he saw it as the raw material of transcendence. The Dionysian spirit says yes even to pain, because it recognizes that pain is the rhythm of creation. In the end, Nietzsche wrote, we must be grateful to pain. It is the womb of our strength. To embrace both gods, Nietzsche believed, is to live as an artist of existence, shaping chaos into form without denying its wildness. The world becomes a canvas painted with contradiction, and the self becomes its brush. Every act, every joy, every heartbreak becomes part of a larger composition. Take a moment to imagine what that means. to live not by fleeing suffering, but by transforming it, to create order not by denying chaos, but by giving it purpose, to let the rational and the passionate coexist within you like two instruments playing one symphony. That Nietzsche believed is what it means to live beautifully. In the end, Nietzsche saw Apollo and Dionysus not as gods of the past, but as forces within every human being. One calls for precision, the other for abandon. One builds temples, the other tears them down to plant forests. The art of life lies in letting both breathe, to hold the line between control and chaos, never extinguishing either. For in that fragile harmony, in that eternal dance between form and freedom, lies the highest affirmation of life. To Nietzsche, the tragedy of existence is not that it contains suffering, but that we have forgotten how to celebrate it. The marriage of Apollo and Dionysus reminds us that life's beauty comes not from peace, but from tension, not from perfection, but from becoming. The birth of tragedy. Why we need beautiful suffering. In his first book, The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche described something remarkable, that art was born not from beauty alone, but from suffering. He saw in Greek tragedy the deepest expression of the human condition, a mirror that reflects our pain, not to wound us, but to make us whole. Through tragedy, he said, humanity learned to look at the chaos of existence and say, even this is beautiful. The Greeks, he believed, achieved what no civilization before or since has truly mastered. They transformed despair into art. Their tragedies, the stories of Oedipus, Prometheus, Antigone, were not meant to comfort or moralize. They did not offer redemption, nor divine justice. They showed human beings crushed by fate, torn by contradiction, doomed by necessity. And yet, somehow they left the audience feeling affirmed. Through art, the Greeks found a way to love life even when it was unbearable. Nietzsche called this transformation the highest act of creativity, the merging of the Apollonian and the Dionysian, the two divine energies that shape all art. Apollo, the god of form and light, gives tragedy its structure, its poetry, its restraint. Dionysus, the god of intoxication and ecstasy, gives it its soul, its chaos, its passion, its embrace of destruction. Together, they create what Nietzsche called the tragic vision of life. In that vision, there are no false consolations. Suffering is not denied or disguised. It is faced directly, but not as mere pain. Instead, tragedy elevates it into meaning. It does not erase sorrow, it gives it music. The Greeks, Nietzsche said, understood that beauty is not the absence of pain, but the transformation of it. To watch a tragedy was to confront the cruelty of life, and yet emerge with a strange, radiant joy. The audience saw on stage what they could not bear to face in themselves: loss, failure, death, and yet they left uplifted, because tragedy reminded them that even in ruin, there is something worth affirming, that to live is to suffer, and to suffer beautifully is to be human. Nietzsche believed this capacity, to affirm life in spite of its terror, was the mark of a strong civilization. The Greeks did not hide behind illusions. They knew that the gods could be cruel, that fate was indifferent, that death was final. And yet they celebrated life with festivals, with art, with laughter. Their genius was not optimism, but courage, the ability to look into the abyss and sing. In tragedy, Nietzsche saw a kind of divine honesty. It rejects both naive hope and hopeless despair. It tells the truth that existence is full of suffering, contradiction, and loss, but it tells it with such beauty that we can bear it. The music, the poetry, the rhythm, they are not distractions from pain, but vessels for it. Through them, pain becomes meaningful, even luminous. This, Nietzsche thought, was the secret of great art. It does not comfort. It awakens. It does not cure suffering. It transfigures it. The artist takes the chaos of life, the grief, the rage, the longing, and gives it form. And in that act, pain becomes creation. We have art, Nietzsche wrote later, so that we shall not perish of the truth. Yet Nietzsche lamented that this tragic wisdom had been lost. After Socrates, philosophy began to demand reasons, explanations, solutions. The age of logic replaced the age of tragedy. The Socratic belief that knowledge leads to virtue, that reason can conquer chaos, dissolved the Dionysian spirit. In its place came the belief that suffering could and should be eliminated, not understood. Nietzsche saw this shift as the beginning of a cultural decline. By denying suffering, modernity also denied depth. Life became shallower, safer but emptier. People sought comfort instead of greatness, pleasure instead of meaning. The tragic wisdom that once made humanity strong was replaced by a hunger for certainty, for control, for moral reassurance. For Nietzsche, this was more than aesthetic nostalgia. He believed that tragedy is essential to spiritual health. Without it, we cannot bear reality. We become fragile, incapable of confronting pain without collapsing or seeking escape. The tragic spirit, on the other hand, teaches us to live fully, to embrace contradiction, to love life even when it wounds us. To recover that spirit, Nietzsche urged a return to art, to creation, to the dance of Apollo and Dionysus. Tragedy, he said, is not an ancient relic, but a way of being, a way of turning existence itself into art. To live tragically is to live creatively, to shape your suffering into strength, your chaos into meaning. Take a moment to reflect on that idea, to see suffering not as punishment or failure, but as the raw material of beauty, to understand that pain is not the enemy of joy, but its twin, that one gives depth to the other. When we experience tragedy, in life or in art, we are reminded that the world is vast, that meaning is fragile, and that beauty can emerge even from despair. This is what Nietzsche meant by beautiful suffering. It is not about glorifying pain, but about transforming it, giving it a shape that allows us to say yes to life again. When we cry at a play, or find solace in music, or write words that heal us, we are practicing this ancient art. We are taking what hurts and turning it into something luminous. Nietzsche believed that every person carries within them this capacity to become both the suffering and the artist, both the chaos and the form. The question is whether we dare to use it, whether we can face our pain without seeking to erase it, whether we can turn it into something worth living for. In this, tragedy becomes not just a genre of art, but a philosophy of life, one that does not flee from sorrow but gives it rhythm. It teaches us to love the storm because it gives us lightning, to accept loss because it deepens love, to endure suffering because it creates consciousness. To live tragically, Nietzsche said, is to become an artist of existence, to see even pain as part of the grand design of being. In the end, Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy is not about theater, but about life itself. We are all actors in a cosmic drama, bound to suffer, to create, to fall, to rise again. The task is not to escape the play, but to perform it beautifully, to turn our pain into art, our chaos into song. Because tragedy, at its heart, is not about despair. It is about affirmation. It whispers to us, even in the darkest moment, this too is life, and life is still worth loving. Music is metaphysics, feeling what can't be said. For Nietzsche, music was not entertainment. It was revelation. It was the one art form that reached beneath words, beneath reason, into the primal rhythm of existence itself. He called it metaphysics in sound, a direct expression of life's inner will. While language divides the world into ideas, and art gives it shape, music simply is. It does not describe existence, it becomes it. From his earliest writings to his final years, Nietzsche returned to music as the purest reflection of his philosophy. He believed that through sound, we could glimpse the hidden pulse behind all things, the eternal movement of creation and destruction, harmony and dissonance, birth and decay. To listen deeply was to feel the world thinking through us. In The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche wrote that music is the language of Dionysus, the god of intoxication, ecstasy, and unity. It dissolves boundaries, erases the illusion of individuality, and returns us to something older than thought. When we hear music, he said, we no longer stand apart from life, analyzing it. We become part of its flow. We feel its rhythm in our heartbeat, its rise and fall in our breath. Music for Nietzsche was not made of notes. It was made of necessity, the same creative force that animates the universe. He believed that melodies arise not from ideas, but from the same source as existence itself, the will to power. Every crescendo, every silence, every unresolved chord mirrors life's own tension, the endless striving to become more, to expand, to overcome. This is why Nietzsche thought, words will always fail where music succeeds. Words explain, music expresses, words reach the intellect, music bypasses it, speaking directly to the body, to the unconscious, to the hidden core of what we are. To truly hear music is to glimpse the metaphysical truth that all creation is rhythm, that existence itself is composed, not reasoned. He admired composers like Schubert, Chopin, and most profoundly, Wagner, at least for a time. In Wagner's early operas, Nietzsche believed he had found the modern rebirth of Greek tragedy, a synthesis of art, myth, and music that could awaken modern humanity to the Dionysian depths it had forgotten. Music, in that vision, was not a pastime. It was redemption through sound. But Nietzsche's faith in Wagner would eventually collapse. He came to see in Wagner's later work a corruption, an appeal not to strength but to sentiment, to pity, to religious nostalgia. Wagner had turned music into moral theater, Nietzsche said, beauty in chains. True music, by contrast, was immoral. It did not instruct, it intoxicated. It did not flatter the listener, it consumed them. For Nietzsche, the highest form of music was not the one that comforts, but the one that awakens. The kind that stirs the soul into motion, that reminds us that beneath the calm surface of our minds lies something ancient, raw, and infinite. He loved music that didn't beg to be understood, music that demanded surrender. Nietzsche himself was not only a philosopher, but a composer. His works are rarely performed, but he believed deeply that philosophy and music were siblings, two languages attempting the same impossible task, to express the inexpressible. Where the philosopher uses logic to climb toward truth, the musician dissolves into it. The philosopher builds a bridge of words, the musician dives directly into the current. Through music, Nietzsche found an escape from the prison of concepts. He wrote, "Without music, life would be a mistake." That line is not hyperbole. It reveals his conviction that the rational world, all our science, politics, and morality, rests on a foundation of feeling. We are not thinkers who sometimes feel. We are feelings that have learned to think, and music, more than any other art, returns us to that truth. For Nietzsche, music was the antidote to nihilism. When God dies, when meaning collapses, when reason falters, music remains. It does not justify life. It affirms it. It reminds us that meaning does not come from explanation, but from experience. A melody does not ask why it exists. It simply plays. And in doing so, it makes life bearable again. He saw in music a model for how to live. Each note must find its place within the whole. Each dissonance must resolve, not through perfection but through tension. The beauty of a symphony lies not in its stillness, but in its struggle, the dance between chaos and form. Life, he believed, works the same way. We are not meant to achieve harmony by erasing conflict, but by embracing it, allowing it to sing. Nietzsche's own life, full of isolation and illness, mirrored this philosophy. His body often betrayed him, but music remained his sanctuary. In it, he found what philosophy could not give, not truth, but affirmation. Through sound, he could feel what he could never rationally believe, that existence, for all its cruelty, was still worth loving. And perhaps this is what he meant when he said that music was metaphysics. It reveals the structure of reality, not as logic, but as emotion. It shows that behind every thought, every law, every act of will, there is rhythm, vibration, energy that moves and transforms. To hear music deeply is to recognize that we too are instruments in this vast composition called existence. Take a moment to imagine that every heartbeat, every thought, every rise and fall of your breath is part of a cosmic melody, one that began long before you and will continue long after. You don't need to understand it, you only need to listen. Nietzsche's philosophy was full of storms, rebellion, contradiction, despair, but music was his still point. It was the place where the storm became rhythm, where even chaos had form. In a godless world, music became his prayer, a way to touch the divine without believing in it. In the end, Nietzsche's relationship with music was not about escape, but reconciliation. It taught him what philosophy could not, that truth is not something to be possessed, but something to be felt, that meaning is not built by words, but sung by existence itself. And perhaps that is why music endures, because it reminds us that even when language fails, life still has melody. Even in silence, the universe hums. The dancing god, laughter as philosophy. Nietzsche once said, "I would only believe in a god who could dance." To most, this sounds like poetry, but for Nietzsche, it was prophecy. He dreamed of a new kind of divinity, not of judgment or solemnity, but of laughter, rhythm, and lightness. A god free from guilt, free from gravity, one who affirms the world not through commandments, but through joy. He imagined such a god as Dionysus, the eternal dancer, the spirit of life itself. Where the old gods ruled through fear, Dionysus invites us to dance. To Nietzsche, that dance was not frivolous, it was philosophy in motion. To dance is to say yes to the music of existence. Even when it plays in dissonance, it is to move with chaos instead of resisting it. This image of the dancing god reveals one of Nietzsche's deepest insights, that wisdom is not heavy. True wisdom, he said, is light. It does not weigh us down with certainty or guilt. It makes us agile, open, alive. The greatest events, he wrote, are not our loudest, but our stillest hours. And laughter, that sudden, effortless release, was for Nietzsche the signature of that lightness. He believed laughter could be sacred. It is the moment when the intellect surrenders its armor, when irony and suffering melt into play. Laughter breaks the tyranny of seriousness, and with it the illusions that enslave us. To laugh, for Nietzsche, was to transcend resentment, to look upon even tragedy with eyes that no longer accuse. In this, Nietzsche's laughter is not the laughter of mockery or escape. It is the laughter of awakening, the laughter that comes when one finally sees that existence is both meaningless and magnificent, absurd and divine, finite and infinite. It is not cruelty, but clarity. It is the sound of acceptance. He called this the laughter of the heights. Only those who have suffered deeply, he thought, can truly laugh in this way, because only they have seen life's darkness and chosen to affirm it. The weak laugh to forget, the strong laugh to remember. The dancing god does not deny the pain of existence. He transforms it into rhythm. Every tragedy becomes choreography. Every scar becomes movement. Nietzsche's idea of laughter was born from his understanding of tragedy. The Greeks, he believed, did not see tragedy as despair, but as celebration. Their festivals for Dionysus were not funerals, but feasts. They looked into the abyss and danced anyway. Nietzsche wanted to revive that spirit, to teach humanity that laughter, not faith, is the highest response to the chaos of existence. He contrasted this with what he saw in Christianity, a God who suffers endlessly, whose love is heavy with guilt. The Dionysian god, by contrast, suffers too, but he dances through his suffering. His joy does not erase pain. It includes it. He does not promise heaven as compensation. He turns the earth itself into a festival. To laugh, then, is to participate in the divine game. It is to see the contradictions of life, birth and death, joy and sorrow, order and chaos, and no longer demand that they make sense, It is to say yes to them all at once. Laughter becomes the bridge between the tragic and the divine. Nietzsche often wrote of the philosopher as a kind of dancer, one who moves lightly between ideas, never chained to certainty. He wanted thought itself to dance, to become graceful, rhythmic, alive. The greatest thinker, he said, is not the one who builds the tallest system, but the one who can dance on the edge of all systems, unafraid to fall. Laughter, for Nietzsche, was also rebellion, not against morality or society, but against heaviness. He saw the world weighed down by guilt, duty, and seriousness. People mistook suffering for virtue, obedience for goodness, sadness for depth. But to him, this gravity was the sickness of the soul. The cure was laughter, laughter as liberation, laughter as flight. He compared the philosopher's laughter to that of Zarathustra, his prophetic voice in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Zarathustra laughs not because life is easy, but because it is infinitely complex, because it defies all systems and yet continues to sing. His laughter echoes through mountains because it is both affirmation and farewell, a goodbye to illusions and a welcome to everything that remains. Nietzsche's laughter is not mere joy. It is wisdom reborn as play. It says, "I have suffered, I have despaired, but now I see that even despair is part of the dance." It's the laughter that comes when you stop taking existence personally, when you realize that you are not the center of the storm, but part of its rhythm. And perhaps this is what Nietzsche meant by the dancing God, that divinity is not found in perfection, but in participation, in movement, in change, in the courage to live without certainty. The dancing God does not promise answers. He teaches us how to move beautifully through the questions. Take a moment to imagine that. To imagine living with such lightness that even tragedy cannot break you, only teach you new steps. To see every fall as part of the choreography, every ending as another rhythm beginning. Nietzsche's laughter is not denial. It is transcendence. It is the moment when suffering becomes song, when gravity becomes grace. He once wrote, "Not by wrath, but by laughter do we slay," meaning we defeat despair not through anger, but through joy. Laughter is not escape from life. It is mastery of it. It is the philosopher's final affirmation that the world, for all its chaos, is still worth dancing in. In the end, Nietzsche's dancing God is not a deity to worship, but an attitude to cultivate, a way of being in the world that does not cling, does not fear, does not kneel. To live like the dancing God is to love life so completely that you can laugh with it, even at its cruelest. Because when we learn to laugh as Nietzsche meant it, not from mockery but from awe, we too become dancers in the great rhythm of existence. We too join the divine play. And perhaps that, in the end, is the secret of the dancing God, that joy itself is wisdom and laughter, the highest form of prayer. The artist as redeemer, creating meaning from the abyss. Nietzsche believed that after the death of God, only one figure could redeem humanity, not the saint, not the philosopher, but the artist. When all old meanings crumble, when faith dissolves and morality fractures, what remains is creation. The artist, he said, is the redeemer of existence, because the artist transforms chaos into beauty. The artist is not saved from the abyss. They build a bridge across it. To Nietzsche, the world has no inherent meaning. It does not care, does not console, does not explain. But the artist, the creator, refuses despair. Faced with the void, they answer not with belief, but with imagination. Their work becomes an act of defiance, a declaration that even if life has no purpose, it can still be made beautiful. In this sense, art is not escape. It is confrontation. Nietzsche saw the artist as one who dares to look directly into chaos and shape it. He wrote that art is the highest task and the proper metaphysical activity of this life. Why? Because through art, we affirm existence itself. We take the meaningless and make it meaningful. We impose form upon the formless. We create order not because it exists, but because we need it to survive. This is why Nietzsche revered art above religion and science alike. Science reveals what is art, creates what could be. Religion seeks salvation beyond life. Art finds redemption within it. The artist does not flee to heaven. They transform the earth. Their canvas is not an escape from suffering, but its transfiguration. The artist, Nietzsche believed, redeems life precisely because they do not deny its darkness. They accept it. They use it. Every masterpiece, he said, is a wound turned luminous. Every great artist must suffer, not as punishment, but as initiation. Suffering deepens perception, and only those who have walked through despair can give birth to beauty that endures. But what makes this redemption possible is not suffering itself. It is what the artist does with it. The weak spirit endures pain and calls it meaningless. The strong spirit endures it and says, I will make it mean something. In that act of transformation lies the essence of art and of Nietzsche's vision for humanity. Art redeems by affirming. It takes what is unbearable and makes it bearable by giving it form. Tragedy does not erase pain. It transforms it into song. A painting does not erase death. It immortalizes it. Music does not end sorrow. It makes it vibrate through the soul until it becomes beauty. This, Nietzsche thought, is the deepest human strength, not to be saved from the world, but to say yes to it again and again. The artist, then, is not a decorator of life, but its interpreter. They do not make reality pretty. They make it visible. They turn the invisible currents of feeling and thought into shape, sound, and color. They remind us that life is not something to endure, but something to be sculpted. Nietzsche saw in this act of creation a kind of divine rebellion. When God dies, the artist inherits his role, not to rule, but to create. The artist becomes the new source of value, the new meaning maker. But unlike the priest, the artist does not demand belief. They invite experience. Their truths are not commandments but melodies, to be felt, not obeyed. This is what Nietzsche meant by aesthetic justification. In a world without metaphysical meaning, the only justification for existence is aesthetic, that it can be made beautiful. Only as an aesthetic phenomenon, he wrote, is existence justified. Art redeems life not by explaining it, but by showing that it can be worth living without explanation. But Nietzsche's artist is not merely a painter or poet. The true artist is anyone who creates meaning from chaos, who treats their life as a work of art. To live artistically is to craft your own character as carefully as a sculptor shapes marble. It means to choose, to compose, to give style to one's existence. One must give birth to a dancing star, he wrote. From the chaos within, every decision becomes a brushstroke. Every failure, a texture in the composition of the self. This is the artist's redemption. Not escape from suffering, but transformation through it. When life wounds them, they turn the wound into color. When meaning collapses, they rebuild it with rhythm. The artist redeems life because they refuse to let despair have the last word. Nietzsche believed this capacity to create meaning was the only true antidote to nihilism. When all external sources of purpose dissolve, we must become artists of our own existence. The artist teaches us that even the abyss can be beautiful if we have the courage to shape it. In that sense, every act of creation is an act of salvation, not by divine mercy, but by human will. The artist Esm's laughter replaces the priest Esm's sermon. Their brush replaces the cross. Their symphony replaces confession. Through them, the world is reborn, not as paradise, but as possibility. They remind us that the question is not, why is there suffering, but what will you make of it? Take a moment to imagine that life itself could be treated as an artwork in progress. Every mistake becomes texture. Every heartbreak becomes shading. Every joy becomes light. The artist does not need certainty. They need courage. They do not need faith. They need imagination. Their redemption is not in escape, but in creation. This is why Nietzsche admired the artist more than the philosopher. The philosopher seeks truth. The artist creates it. The philosopher asks what life means. The artist lives as if they already know. In that act, they redeem existence, not by solving it, but by celebrating it. And perhaps this is what Nietzsche meant when he said that art is humanity's greatest justification. The artist does not explain the world. They make it bearable, even sacred. They redeem not by faith, but by creation, not by obedience, but by style. In the end, Nietzsche's artist is not merely a painter of beauty, but a philosopher of affirmation. They are the one who stands at the edge of the abyss and does not turn away. They look into the darkness, and with trembling hands, they begin to create. Because for Nietzsche, the artist is the final redeemer, not because they escape the tragedy of existence, but because they transform it. Through them, life learns to love itself again. Solitude and the mountain. Why wisdom requires distance. In Nietzsche's world, solitude was not escape. It was transformation. He believed that true wisdom could not be found among crowds, nor in the noise of society's chatter. It could only be earned in the high, cold air of distance, in solitude on the mountain. For Nietzsche, the mountain was more than a place. It was a symbol of inner elevation, the slow ascent toward clarity, courage, and perspective. The one who climbs it must leave behind everything that dulls the mind: comfort, conformity, companionship, and walk alone toward the thin air, where thought sharpens and illusions fall away. In solitude, Nietzsche said, one learns not what to think, but how to see. And to see clearly requires distance from others, from noise, even from oneself. Nietzsche spent much of his life in isolation, not by choice alone, but by necessity. His body failed him early. Illness and migraines exiled him from the bustling world of academia. Yet from that exile came his greatest works. He lived among the mountains of Switzerland and Italy, walking for hours alone, writing thoughts that burned with both pain and lucidity. It was there, in solitude, that he began to see the pattern of things, how society numbs the individual, how comfort weakens the will, how the herd destroys originality. The mountain became his teacher. It demanded silence, endurance, and honesty. The path to greatness, he wrote, is one of loneliness, not the loneliness of despair, but of vision. To Nietzsche, solitude was not rejection of humanity. It was preparation to return to it with new insight. The one who retreats to the mountain does not flee. They rise. They separate themselves long enough to see the world without distortion. Those who can breathe the air of my heights, he wrote, must be strong of lungs, because the mountain's air is thin, too pure for the ordinary spirit. It strips away illusions the way cold strips away breath. Solitude for Nietzsche was a kind of crucible. The noise of others dulls thought. Their expectations become invisible chains. Alone, you begin to hear the quiet voice that was always yours, the one drowned out by duty and distraction. It speaks not of comfort, but of creation. It whispers not what you should be, but what you could become. But solitude is not gentle. It exposes you. It holds a mirror to your emptiness and demands that you fill it yourself. Many retreat from it, Nietzsche said, because they cannot endure their own thoughts. Solitude strips away the false self, the one sustained by validation, by praise, by belonging. What remains is frightening: your naked will, your raw freedom. Yet Nietzsche insisted that only in this state could one create something truly one's own. Every great thinker, artist, and visionary, he said, must learn to endure isolation. Creation requires distance. The one who seeks truth must first walk away from the marketplace of opinions, away from applause, away from comfort, because truth cannot survive the crowd. He compared solitude to the high mountain air, invigorating but dangerous. Too long in it, and one may freeze. Too little, and one never awakens. The challenge is balance, to climb high enough for vision, but not so high that one forgets warmth. Nietzsche's own life reflects that balance breaking. His solitude gave him genius, but it also broke his mind. He reached heights few have seen, but at the cost of human connection. In that sense, solitude is not without risk. It can turn insight into madness, reflection into isolation. But Nietzsche believed that without it, humanity stagnates. The mountain is perilous, yes, but so is the valley of comfort, routine, and safety. To live only in company is to forget the strength of one's own mind. The mountain, he said, purifies ambition. Up there is no audience, no applause, only silence. It forces the question, why do you create? Why do you think? Without external reward, only one answer remains, because it is who you are. That, Nietzsche thought, is the true foundation of strength, to act not for praise, but from inner necessity. And yet, Nietzsche's solitude was not cynicism. He did not withdraw out of hatred for humanity, but out of love for what it could become. He dreamed of returning, not as preacher or savior, but as teacher, one who brings down from the mountain a new way of seeing, a new kind of strength. His solitude was like a blacksmith's forge. He entered raw and emerged forged. There is something timeless in this image, the thinker on the mountain, surrounded by silence, yet shaping the world below through his thoughts. Nietzsche believed that wisdom grows only in this distance, that perspective requires detachment. The philosopher must climb not to escape life, but to understand it from above. Only from height can one see the patterns of the valley, its shadows, its repetitions, its endless noise. But solitude is not only physical. Nietzsche meant something deeper, an inward distance. One can live among people yet remain alone in spirit, untouched by their illusions. The higher individual must learn this inner solitude, the art of being with others without becoming one of them. Take a moment to imagine what that means, to stand quietly in the world, hearing its noise, yet not swallowed by it. To move through life, not in reaction, but with intention. Solitude, Nietzsche believed, is what gives birth to this inner independence. It is not isolation from the world, but mastery of it. In solitude, the higher person learns to listen to the silence beneath the noise, to hear the rhythm of their own becoming. The mountain is not escape. It is preparation. The one who descends from it brings something priceless, perspective, clarity, vision. They return to the world not as wanderers, but as creators. For Nietzsche, solitude was the highest form of strength. It is where thought ripens, where individuality hardens into destiny. He knew it was lonely, even painful, but he also knew that every great creation begins there. The higher we soar, he wrote, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. And yet, he did not pity those below. He understood that wisdom is not meant to remain on the mountain. The climb is for vision, but the descent is for sharing it. True solitude, he said, is not a retreat from humanity. It is the price of returning with something to give. Because to Nietzsche, solitude was never an ending. It was the beginning of clarity, the distance required to love the world more deeply, to see it as it is, and to say, even from the heights, yes, this too is life. Friendship and conflict. Love that demands growth. Nietzsche's idea of friendship was not gentle. It was not built on comfort or similarity. For him, the truest friends were not those who made life easier, but those who made it deeper, who challenged, provoked, and even wounded us in the service of our becoming. Friendship in Nietzsche's philosophy was not a refuge from struggle. It was a struggle, a sacred tension between love and opposition. He believed that friendship, like every great relationship, must contain an element of conflict. Without it, there can be no growth. He wrote, "In every real man, a child is hidden who wants to play, but beware of your friend if he plays not." The friend who never challenges us, who only agrees, is not a friend but a mirror. Nietzsche valued the one who confronts us, who sees us as we are, not as we wish to be seen. To Nietzsche, friendship was an arena of transformation. True friends are not bound by flattery, but by shared striving, by the will to become more. He saw friendship as the highest form of love because it is rooted in respect, not need. It seeks not comfort, but elevation. In The Friend, he wrote, "One should have one's best enemy." It's a paradoxical idea, friendship as both love and rivalry. But Nietzsche understood that we grow only through friction. Just as a blade sharpens against another, the self refines itself through resistance. The friend who dares to oppose you, to question, to disagree, to demand more, is not your enemy. They are your test, your mirror, your companion in ascent. He contrasted this vision sharply with what he saw in modern relationships, bonds built on comfort, conformity, and weakness. Most friendships, he thought, are based on avoidance of solitude. They are escapes from boredom or fear. People seek others not to grow, but to hide from themselves. Nietzsche called such relationships herd friendships, alliances of safety rather than strength. In these friendships, one says what pleases, one hides what offends, but this, Nietzsche warned, leads to spiritual stagnation. To be truly alive, one must surround oneself not with comforters, but with creators, with those who challenge one's certainty, who make one uneasy, who demand one become more than what they are. For Nietzsche, the highest kind of friendship was born from solitude. It was not the antidote to isolation, but the meeting of two who had first learned to stand alone. Only the strong, he believed, could be true friends, because only the self-sufficient can give without needing to possess. The weak seek friends to fill their emptiness. The strong seek them to share their overflow. He imagined friendship as a mountain climb shared by two independent souls. They do not lean on each other for support, nor drag one another upward. They ascend side by side, each responsible for their own steps, yet strengthened by the other's presence. Their bond lies not in dependence, but in shared vision, in the rare recognition of another who also dares to live dangerously, to think freely, to create rather than conform. But Nietzsche also knew that friendship, like all things alive, carries risk. When one grows and the other refuses, when one transforms and the other remains still, love becomes tension. He did not romanticize this pain. He saw it as necessary. Love your friend as a work of art, he said, meaning love them as something that changes, something imperfect, something that must be renewed through struggle. True friendship demands courage. The courage to wound and to be wounded, the courage to speak truth when silence would be easier. It demands trust, deep enough to survive honesty. Nietzsche believed that only through such tension could friendship become what it is meant to be, a crucible for strength, a union that forces both to grow. This is why Nietzsche's idea of friendship feels so rare and radical even today. It rejects comfort in favor of vitality. It asks not, "Who understands me?" but "Who makes me greater?" It values distance as much as closeness, because love that cannot breathe in separation is not love, but dependency. Nietzsche often wrote that the truest friendships are marked by long silences. Not every moment requires speech. Not every bond requires presence. The higher friendship endures distance, physical, emotional, even philosophical, because it is built on something larger than shared pleasure, shared becoming. He experienced this idea painfully in his own life. His friendships often began with intensity and ended in silence. His break with Richard Wagner, once his greatest friend and inspiration, became one of his defining wounds. But even that break, he saw as necessary, a painful act of self-preservation, an assertion of independence. One repays a teacher badly, he wrote, if one always remains a pupil. That insight reveals Nietzsche's strange tenderness, a love that expresses itself through freedom. The highest friendship, he believed, is one that does not imprison either party in expectation. It celebrates transformation, even when it means separation. To hold someone as they change, or to let them go when they must, is the purest form of love. Take a moment to think of that. Friendship is something dynamic, alive, not a static comfort but a shared experiment in becoming. It asks both to evolve, to challenge, to risk loss for the sake of authenticity. Nietzsche's friendship is not the warmth of sameness, it is the fire of transformation. In a world that often confuses kindness with agreement, his vision feels bracing, even harsh. But behind it lies deep faith. Faith that the human spirit can handle truth, that love can survive honesty, that the strongest relationships are not those that shield us from growth, but push us toward it. In the end, Nietzsche's philosophy of friendship is a call to higher love, one that demands courage, not comfort. It is a love that refuses to flatter, that dares to challenge, that celebrates difference as much as unity. It is not the love that soothes us to sleep, but the love that awakens us, sharp, tender, necessary. Because in the tension between closeness and distance, between affection and conflict, something extraordinary happens. Two souls, once separate, begin to shape each other, not through possession but through recognition. And in that recognition lies the truest kind of love, the kind that demands we become who we are. Nietzsche's friendships, like his philosophy, were forged in solitude and fire. They burned fiercely, painfully, beautifully. Because for him, to love another was not to make them safe. It was to make them strong. Eternal becoming. There is no final form. Nietzsche's vision of life was not one of arrival, but of becoming. He saw existence not as a fixed reality, but as a process, a vast, unending transformation. Everything from the smallest thought to the grandest civilization is caught in motion, constantly dissolving and recreating itself. There is no final truth, no ultimate perfection, no still point at the end of striving. To live, Nietzsche believed, is to flow, to be a work forever unfinished. This idea is at the heart of his philosophy, that the universe is not being but becoming, that what we call truth, or self, or meaning, are only temporary forms in an ocean of change. The tragedy, he thought, is that humans crave stability. We long for conclusions, for certainty, for something eternal to cling to, but life denies us that comfort. It moves, relentlessly. It transforms us whether we wish it or not. Nietzsche saw this not as despair, but as liberation. To live in a world of becoming means nothing is final, not even our suffering, not even our mistakes. The self, he said, is not a substance but a story, one written and rewritten with every decision, every experience, every moment of courage or fear. To believe in final form is to deny life's creativity. To embrace becoming is to join in that creativity, to dance with change instead of resisting it. He once wrote, "The snake that cannot shed its skin must die." It was his way of saying that the self must continually outgrow itself or perish in stagnation. To hold on to an identity too tightly, to cling to who we were, is to suffocate our future. Nietzsche saw the great individuals, the creators, as those who could shed their skin again and again without nostalgia or fear. They were not defined by what they were, but by what they were becoming. But this idea of eternal becoming is unsettling. It means there is no final resting place, no ultimate wisdom, no perfect peace. Even enlightenment, Nietzsche would say, is not a destination but a rhythm, an awakening that must be renewed endlessly. He believed that those who seek a final state of truth or salvation misunderstand the nature of existence. Life is not meant to resolve, it is meant to continue. This is why Nietzsche distrusted systems and ideologies that promised completion, religion, morality, even certain forms of philosophy. They all offered the illusion of finality, a heaven, a moral endpoint, a perfect society, a final truth. But for Nietzsche, these were prisons built by the fear of change. The human spirit is not made to rest. Its vitality depends on movement, on the eternal tension between what is and what could be. To accept becoming is to abandon the dream of permanence. But in doing so, Nietzsche thought, we gain something far greater: freedom, the freedom to reinvent, to evolve, to treat every end as a beginning. He imagined the strong spirit as one who could look at their life, its chaos, its instability, and say, yes, this too is beautiful. Such a person does not fear change. They create with it. They see flux, not as a threat, but as the canvas of existence. He called this the innocence of becoming. the ability to live without guilt, without nostalgia, without the need for ultimate justification. The child, he said, embodies this innocence. It plays, creates, and destroys without shame or final purpose. The child does not ask what the game means. The game is the meaning. In this way, the child becomes Nietzsche's symbol of eternal renewal, the spirit free from the weight of perfection. Nietzsche's philosophy of becoming was not a rejection of meaning, but a redefinition of it. Meaning, he thought, is not something we find. It is something we create, again and again. It is not carved in stone, but written in sand. To live meaningfully, then, is not to hold on to one truth forever, but to continually make new ones. He often spoke of the artist as the model for this way of living. The artist knows that creation never ends. Every masterpiece is both culmination and departure, the birth of something that will itself be surpassed. To the artist, incompletion is not failure. It is the condition of life. Nietzsche believed the greatest art and the greatest lives are those that embrace this endless metamorphosis. But the acceptance of becoming also requires strength. It demands that we give up illusions of control. To live in constant change is to face the abyss, the knowledge that there is no fixed foundation beneath our feet. Most people cannot bear that. They long for certainty, for definition. They cling to identity, to ideology, to routine. Yet Nietzsche urged us to look deeper into that abyss, not to fear it, for beneath it lies the creative power of life itself. He wrote, "You must have chaos in yourself to give birth to a dancing star." Chaos, for Nietzsche, was not disorder, but possibility, the fertile ground of becoming. Those who try to suppress chaos, who demand closure, destroy their own potential. The strong spirit learns to live within it, to shape it, to let it burn without being consumed. Nietzsche's idea of eternal becoming also reshapes how we see time. Instead of a straight line leading somewhere, time becomes a circle, not of repetition, but of renewal. Each moment is complete, not because it ends something, but because it contains the power to begin again. To live this way is to live without seeking escape, to see life not as a means to an end, but as an end in itself. In such a vision, perfection disappears, but so does despair. There is no final form to reach, and therefore no failure that lasts. Everything is transient, but everything returns in new form. To understand this is to make peace with impermanence, not as a resignation, but as a celebration. To become eternal is not to remain unchanged, but to embrace change endlessly. Take a moment to imagine that. Imagine if you stopped measuring progress by how close you are to completion. Imagine if your purpose was not to finish, but to continue, to wake each day as a new version of yourself, not bound by yesterday's expectations, to become a river rather than a monument. This, Nietzsche believed, is the secret to strength, not endurance against change, but harmony with it. Eternal becoming is not a curse, but a gift. It means there is always more to make, more to love, more to understand. It means that life, in its constant transformation, never runs out of meaning, because meaning is what we give it, again and again. In the end, Nietzsche's vision of eternal becoming asks for humility and courage. Humility to accept that we are never finished, and courage to keep creating anyway. To live this way is to be both artist and artwork, sculpting oneself from moment to moment, without ever claiming to be complete. For Nietzsche, this was the highest form of affirmation, to love not the idea of perfection, but the experience of growth. To find beauty, not in arrival, but in motion. To see in every ending the promise of another beginning. Because to live, he said, is to be unfinished, and perhaps that is the deepest wisdom, that there is no final form, only the endless joy of transformation. The laughter of the gods, tragic joy as acceptance. Nietzsche once imagined that if the gods could laugh, it would not be with mockery or cruelty, but with the laughter of understanding. A laughter born not from ignorance of suffering, but from seeing beyond it. This divine laughter, he thought, was the highest expression of wisdom, a joy that arises not in spite of tragedy, but because of it. For Nietzsche, life was not a problem to be solved, but a drama to be affirmed. And to affirm it, all of it, including pain, chaos, and loss, was to reach the state he called tragic joy. This is not the laughter of denial, nor the laughter that hides tears. It is the laughter that comes after tears, the laughter of one who has faced the darkness and chosen to smile anyway. Nietzsche believed that the most profound souls are those who can hold contradiction, who can see the cruelty of existence and still call it beautiful. The laughter of the gods is not the escape from tragedy. It is the transformation of tragedy into art. To laugh at life's suffering is not to trivialize it, but to transcend it. He found inspiration for this idea in the ancient Greeks. They created tragedies that showed the full brutality of fate. Kings ruined, heroes destroyed, lovers doomed. Yet their art did not despair. It celebrated the vitality of life even in destruction. Their gods were not moral judges, but dancers, poets, and tricksters, divine beings who laughed because they understood that creation and destruction are inseparable. This laughter, Nietzsche thought, was what separated the Greeks from later civilizations obsessed with guilt and redemption. They did not seek escape from pain through moral purity or divine forgiveness. They faced it, sang it, and danced it. Their laughter was the sound of strength, the soul's refusal to bow before suffering. Nietzsche called this the Dionysian spirit, the power to affirm life as a whole, with all its horror and wonder. To laugh like the gods is to see the unity behind opposites, to understand that joy and sorrow, creation and destruction, life and death, are not enemies but partners in the same eternal dance. Yet Nietzsche knew how hard this laughter is to achieve. Humans, he said, cling to meaning like a shield. We invent morality, purpose, and heaven to make life bearable. But the gods do not need meaning. They see that life is its own justification. Their laughter echoes across eternity because they have accepted what humans fear most, that existence has no final explanation, and that this too is beautiful. To laugh like a god is to no longer demand answers. It is to say yes to life, even when it breaks you. It is to look at pain and see in it the same energy that creates stars, music, and love. Nietzsche called this amor fati, the love of fate. It is the soul's final maturity, when it no longer wishes for the world to be different, but loves it as it is, whole, chaotic, magnificent. The laughter of the gods, then, is the laughter of acceptance. It is not loud or mocking, but quiet and vast, the laughter of one who understands that suffering is not an error, but the condition of life's beauty. Without loss, there is no love. Without death, no meaning. The gods laugh because they have seen the circle complete itself. Destruction feeding creation, every ending giving birth to something new. Nietzsche saw this laughter as a sign of strength, not physical, but spiritual. It belongs to those who can face the absurdity of existence without flinching, to those who can let go of the need for justice, reward, or ultimate truth, and still affirm life as good. This, he believed, was the secret of greatness. He contrasted this with the laughter of the weak, the laughter of cynicism, mockery, and bitterness. That kind of laughter is hollow. It hides resentment. True laughter, the laughter of the gods, is full of lightness. It is born from having suffered deeply and emerged not bitter, but free. Nietzsche wanted humanity to evolve toward this divine laughter, to learn to live without illusion, yet without despair, to be able to look upon the tragedy of the world and still say, it is good that it exists. This, he said, is the ultimate affirmation, the spirit that dances on the edge of chaos and still finds rhythm in the storm. Such laughter, Nietzsche knew, cannot be forced. It is not an emotion, but a realization, a quiet shift of perspective. It comes when we stop fighting what is inevitable, when we stop dividing the world into good and evil, success and failure. It comes when we see that even our suffering is creative, that it sculpts us, deepens us, teaches us to feel the full spectrum of existence. He imagined the philosopher as one who could reach this point, one who laughs like a god because he no longer resists the flow of life. His laughter is not arrogance but compassion for himself, for the world, for the endless dance of creation and decay. It is the laughter that says, even in tragedy, there is joy. Even in chaos, there is meaning, because I have chosen to love it. Take a moment to imagine that kind of laughter. The laughter that comes not from comfort, but from clarity. The laughter that needs no reason, because it has already accepted everything. It is not loud or triumphant. It is soft, infinite, the laughter that echoes through eternity. To Nietzsche, that laughter was the highest wisdom. It was the moment when the human becomes more than human, when the soul learns not only to endure existence, but to celebrate it. It is the laughter that rings out at the end of tragedy, not because the pain is gone, but because one finally sees that the pain too was part of the beauty. In that laughter, Nietzsche found his answer to despair. Against the bleakness of nihilism, he offered not belief, but affirmation. Against sorrow, not denial, but dance. The gods laugh because they are free, and Nietzsche's dream was that we too could learn that freedom. Because when one has learned to laugh as the gods do, when one has turned suffering into song and tragedy into joy, there is nothing left to fear. Only life, endlessly renewing itself, endlessly worthy of love. The return of Zarathustra, becoming the yes to life itself. In the end, Nietzsche's journey leads us here, to Zarathustra's return. The prophet who once descended from the mountain now comes back transformed, carrying not commandments, but laughter, not faith, but affirmation. His return is not triumphal, but serene, the return of one who has made peace with the chaos of existence and learned to say yes to it all. Zarathustra, Nietzsche's poetic alter ego, is not a preacher of salvation. He is a mirror held up to humanity's struggle to love life without illusion. His teachings are not meant to be believed, but experienced, lived and tested against the pain, beauty, and absurdity of being alive. When he returns, it is not as a savior, but as a man who has outgrown the need for salvation. At the heart of his return lies one idea, the eternal yes. For Nietzsche, to say yes to life, wholly, without condition, is the ultimate act of strength. It is to embrace existence, not only when it pleases us, but when it breaks us. To love fate, not because it is kind, but because it is. Zarathustra returns to the world to teach that acceptance, not passive resignation, but a passionate affirmation of everything that is. He has seen the abyss and found it beautiful. He has walked among the ruins of gods and discovered creation in destruction. His laughter is not mockery. It is the echo of understanding. For to love life fully is to love even its pain, its uncertainty, its constant change. It is to say yes, not only to joy, but to tragedy, not only to success, but to loss. Zarathustra's return is the final step of Nietzsche's vision of transformation, from the camel that bears the world's weight, to the lion that rebels against it, to the child that creates anew. The child says yes without guilt, without need to justify. The child plays. Zarathustra embodies that spirit, the spirit of renewal, the innocence of creation after destruction. When he returns, he no longer seeks disciples, he seeks companions, those strong enough to walk their own path, to find their own rhythm in the dance of existence. Nietzsche's prophet does not offer rules. He offers example to live as art, to think as play, to create meaning where none is given. Zarathustra's yes to life is not naive optimism. It is tragic joy. The same laughter of the gods we heard before. It is the realization that there is no redemption waiting beyond this world, and yet this world is enough. It is the courage to say, even if this moment returned eternally, I would live it again. That thought, the eternal recurrence, was Nietzsche's ultimate test of affirmation. Could one love life so completely that one would desire its repetition forever, down to every pain and imperfection. To answer yes to that question, Nietzsche said, is to transcend despair. It is to become one with existence, not a judge of life, but its partner. For Nietzsche, Zarathustra's return symbolizes more than the philosopher's vision. It is the rebirth of the human spirit itself, the moment when humanity learns to stand without crutches, to find meaning not in heaven or ideology, but within the act of living. The one who says yes to life no longer asks for it to be different. They create their own music from its rhythm. Nietzsche called this the great noon, the hour when shadows are shortest, when light falls evenly upon the world, revealing it as it truly is. Zarathustra returns at this hour, not to condemn, but to celebrate. He blesses the world for being imperfect. He blesses humanity for being unfinished. He blesses suffering for being the price of consciousness. In Zarathustra Sip's return, we find the culmination of Nietzsche Sip's philosophy, the reconciliation of opposites. The thinker and the artist, the rebel and the believer, the tragic and the joyous, all dissolve into one being who can say, "Yes, I am everything that happens." To reach that state, Nietzsche believed, one must pass through solitude, conflict, and doubt. One must lose faith in everything external and learn to trust one's own becoming. Only then can the individual return to the world, not as victim, but as creator. The return of Zarathustra is the return of the self to itself, no longer seeking meaning, but giving it. Take a moment to reflect on what that means, to live as one who affirms life completely, to see every failure not as punishment, but as raw material for creation, to face every ending as a new beginning, to say yes to all that has been and in doing so, redeem it. Zarathustra's yes is not easy. It demands everything. It asks us to give up resentment, the bitterness that blames the world for what it is. It asks us to give up comfort, the illusion that life should be fair. And it asks us to give up finality, the fantasy that one day the struggle will end. But in losing these, we gain the greatest power of all, the power to love life as it is, not as it should be. This is the meaning of Zarathustra's return, the return to the earth. Nietzsche's prophet does not ascend into heaven, he descends back into life. He brings with him no gospel, only gratitude. The gratitude of one who has seen that suffering and joy are threads of the same tapestry, that every tear was a necessary color in the picture of existence. And when he laughs, it is not from cruelty or indifference. It is the laughter of affirmation, the laughter of one who has made peace with the eternal dance. He does not seek to fix life, but to join it, to participate in its music, to move in rhythm with its chaos. Nietzsche ends not with despair, but with music, with the sound of yes reverberating through eternity. Zarathustra's laughter is the sound of life itself, saying yes to itself. It is not triumph over suffering, but unity with it, not escape from tragedy, but transformation through it. In that laughter, Nietzsche's long journey finds its peace. After the collapse of God, the death of certainty, the loss of meaning, what remains is not emptiness, but freedom, the freedom to create, to affirm, to live without justification, to say yes to every moment, even this one. Nietzsche's Zarathustra returns not to end the story, but to remind us that there is no end, only the eternal rhythm of life becoming itself again and again, and the courage to keep saying yes. Because to love life, Nietzsche said, is to love even its necessity, to look at everything that is and whisper with quiet certainty once more. And so the journey ends where it began, not in despair, but in affirmation. Nietzsche's philosophy is not a cry against existence, but a song of devotion to it, to say yes to life, to every joy, every loss, every breath, is to become, in your own way, the return of Zarathustra. We return to the mountain where it all began, where thought becomes solitude and solitude becomes strength. Nietzsche never asked us to follow him. He asked us to awaken, to destroy what was false, not out of hate, but out of love for what could be more true, to live not as shadows of comfort, but as creators of meaning. As the echoes of his words fade into silence, remember, philosophy isn't meant to be agreed with. It's meant to unsettle, to challenge, to make you question whether you are becoming who you could be. If this journey made you think, feel, or simply pause for a moment, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the idea that stayed with you the longest. Because the world changes one awakened mind at a time. And as the night grows still, carry these thoughts with quiet strength, and let the dawn find you renewed.